Lingering fear in the LAUSD community after an unusual and disturbing visit. Several federal agents from the Department of Homeland Security showed up at 2 elementary schools this week demanding to talk to students. What happened next has Superintendent Alberto Carvalho praising school workers and demanding answers. Eyewitness News reporter Sophie Flay explains.
What interest should a Homeland Security agent have in a first grader?
On Monday, multiple Homeland Security agents showed up at 2 elementary schools in Los Angeles, according to LAUSD Superintendent Alberto Carvalho. These agents were stopped, questioned, and turned away by principals at Lillian Elementary and Russell Elementary schools, both in the Florence Graham neighborhood.
They wanted access to the students to determine their well-being, based on, according to the agents, the fact that when they entered this country, they entered as unaccompanied minors. It is well known that these students are under the care of relatives.
According to Carvalho, the agents claimed they were not part of immigration and customs enforcement.
They conveyed to both principals that the parents or the legal guardians in charge of these children had provided them authorization for access to these kids in school. That is absolutely, blatantly untrue.
These agents asked specific questions about students ranging from 1st to 6th grade. The superintendent says they arrived in unmarked vehicles and wore casual clothing.
When the principals attempted to write down details about their IDs, they quickly hid their IDs.
All parents from these schools were notified about these incidents. Ahead of the November election, LAUSD staff were trained in protocols to protect students from federal agents showing up at schools.
Yes, folks, that is our unfortunate reality. My name is David Griscom, and I'm joined as always by my good friend and comrade, Matt Leck, for this episode of Left Reckoning. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing pretty okay, David. A little bit agitated by what's going on in the world.
I think you should be very agitated. I mean, everyone's been watching what we've been seeing in LA. I know there's been other actions across the country. I know in Dallas there was recently arrests earlier today. There's tear gas shot out yesterday here in Austin. People are standing up because what the Trump administration is doing, what ICE is doing, is truly monstrous, beyond just the kind of inhumanity of like this deportation regime. The way that they're engaging in it, right? The fear, the worry, the panic that they're trying to engulf this country in is just really, really despicable and disgusting. And to do that to kids, right? Talking about like save the children, protect the children. I mean, this administration is a threat to children all across the globe. And I mean, it's a very worrying moment for sure.
Yeah, and thanks for folks telling me I'm quiet. Hopefully this may fix that issue.
Oh my Lord. They're waging war on us in many ways. But folks, we got a big ass program for everyone. We're going to be talking with 2 wonderful folks from The Nation magazine. The Nation is 160 years old, which is quite an achievement and is actually an important institution for freedom and justice and democracy in this country. So we'll be talking about that new issue later in the program. But before that, we're going to be joined by our good friend and return guest, Stephen Semler. We had him on to break down how Kamala Harris lost the 2024 election, and I'm really excited to have him back on the program to talk about all the changes that we've seen under the Trump administration, what that means for working people. So this is going to be a big one, and then we have a whole big-ass post-game. We're going to be talking a recap on the Texas THC weed situation, the desperation of the Trump administration to hold on to power in the midterms, maybe a visit from, maybe a return to the Kirking It segment.
Kirkenoff. We're going to have a
sorry.
new Kirkenoff segment. He's very afraid of Claudia Sheinbaum and says she's a bigger threat to America than Vladimir Putin. And I think Greg Granite has a good take on why, in what particular sense that's true.
So all that and much, much more. But before we get to that, let's bring on our guest, Stephen Semler. You know him from the excellent Polygraph, which we have a link for folks to follow below. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's my pleasure. Were you just alluding to Charlie Kirk with the Kirchhoff thing?
Yes.
Correct, yeah.
I was watching his interview with Brianna Gray, and I couldn't stop staring at his head. I'm like, man, what it must be like to have parents who are brother and sister.
He is, yeah. I mean, he's not particularly blessed in that department. Well, man, really people should be following Polygraph and keeping up with it. It's a really important resource, I think, today. And again, we'll have links below. And I can't imagine somebody better to sort of talk about some of the depraved things that this government has been engaged in the past few days and, the past few months. But before we get into that, obviously we're having these big conversations about the, quote, big, beautiful bill, the budget cuts, and all these attempts at austerity from the Trump administration. It's always interesting what things are sort of like left, what institutions are left to have kind of free reign for spending. And Matt, I don't know if you have this handy here, but we have this Politico report about what the Pentagon is saying about the stunt for them to ethnically cleanse the country, right, to throw people out of the nation. Is going to cost around $134 million. Now, as everybody who's watching this program knows, I don't think I have to repeat this, but I will just say, what the Trump administration is doing is not needed. The fact that California has refused and said that they don't need this kind of mobilization is correct. Trump has aggravated and made the situation much, much worse with these deployments. But on top of it, it's just a huge waste of money. And it's always interesting to see what things this country is very willing to spend money on.
Want me to jump in?
Sure.
I have many thoughts about this. I mean, what we're seeing basically is just like the limits of Trump's politics, basically. It's getting people to rally around this notion that the only purpose of government is security, or that notion of security, basically. That this is just basically about ruling and not governing. And I think part of it is because there's no really technocratic justification for it. Like the LAPD, out of all organizations, is opposed to sending in active duty military troops.
Mm-hmm. But they're controlled by leftists.
Well, it means the leftist, the leftist Angelino police department.
That's true. And they control the weather as well. So I don't know, man. I mean, this is all just such a disaster. I think part of it is just as a stunt to distract from the contents of the big, beautiful bill, which, by the way, contains $75 billion for ICE. But even that number seems low to me because, as we've seen, there's just such a blurring of jurisdictions now with active duty in the mix. But before, we had Border Patrol not guarding the border, but being deployed inside Los Angeles to harass migrants, spurring what they would call disorder or reaction, and then deployment of more of these personnel. And then you have ICE on top of it. So this is just a huge investment in ruling and not governing. And I think it's because there is no plan to actually govern.
Yeah, and I think you're right to point out the political context that this comes in, because this comes at a point where the Republicans have a very slim margin, and they have different sects of types of Republicans. One is the just cut my taxes idiot, who cares? And then there's other people who are sort of more fundamentalist, let's balance the budget type folks. And how do you get all those guys together is you call them traitors, and like race traitors, basically, which is what Stephen Miller's doing. He says, if we don't fix this, we don't have a country past the big, beautiful bill. And he quote tweets a image of some of these protests against these raids. Like this is very clearly being used to try to pass this giant bill.
Right. I view it sort of in this. So there's a discussion early on whether to split this bill in two. It was going to be basically the tax cut portion, and then it was going to be the spending cuts in like military spending and immigration spending portion. But I think Trump looked at the experience of the Biden administration and Biden's decision to split his infrastructure bill from his social welfare bill. And by doing so, basically doomed the latter. It doomed the social welfare portion. I think Trump's smart to keep it together, to keep all those things together. I sort of view the military spending portion as the infrastructure bill, because it is the military spending portion of this bill is technically the only part of the bill that's been bipartisan so far. Like 5 House Democrats voted with Republicans to vote $150 billion in military spending out of committee. I'm not sure what the Homeland Security numbers were. But that's basically how I see this going down. And I might add that seeing that quote from Stephen Miller, it's always distressing seeing your own name linked to someone so vile. And going back to Charlie Kirk, I actually watched an interview, and one quote that Stephen Miller had was regarding like the failure to actually like launch his full like pornographic vision of violence for anti-immigration policy during Trump's first term, where he said the three major constraints on migrant deportations are personnel, prisons, and planes. So this bill effectively gives him everything he wants. And it's really effective because, again, it distracts from the fact that this bill is just outright class warfare.
Yeah, and I really want to get into that aspect of it too in just a moment. But what we're seeing right now is like, obviously the Trump administration lied when they were running for office, and they, the particular focus of theirs saying that they were going to just focus on deporting quote unquote criminals, and people who are dangerous to society. And now obviously they're just kind of going after whomever, wherever. I'm sure, around where y'all are, you're experiencing this, but a lot of places are quiet right now that usually aren't, right? Because people are afraid to be in public again, which is a big part of this program. And you see like how worrying it is, how monstrous the language from folks like Stephen Miller is, how monstrous the language from folks like Trump and Bannon are. But the fact of the matter is, this was a huge tool that has been built with bipartisan support for a long time. And Matt, if we have this other graph here, I want to talk a little bit about how this budget and the funding for ICE has created this monster that Trump is now unleashing on the country. And Stephen, this is for folks who don't know, this is from Polygraph as well. This is the boosting ICE funding. Sorry, Matt, your thing's over the top. Boosting ICE funding is bipartisan, and it goes through year by year the significant amounts of money that the United States government has been funneling towards ICE.
Right. And not only is this history totally glossed over, which I think is why this chart and several others of mine gained so much traction, is because they add context to a debate that seemingly is partisan, but it's a bipartisan problem. Often, like a lot of the problems that people see, they identify with one party or another, but it's often like a bipartisan problem, which people have trouble accepting. I don't know if the people who only blame Republicans for ICE funding after seeing this chart are convinced. I don't know if I changed their mind at all, but I know people appreciate it. I'm glad you guys did. One thing I'll add is that if you pay attention to the Democratic Party discourse, I've read pretty much I don't know why I've picked Hakeem Jeffries, maybe because of his leadership status in the House, but I've read almost like everything he's had to say about related to ICE funding so far. So I've been ingesting a lot of Hakeem Jeffries discourse. Otherwise, I've been living a pretty healthy lifestyle. I'm exercising a lot and that sort of thing, getting outside, touching grass. But if you do that same thing that I do, paying attention like to what Democratic leadership is saying, basically, and if you look at other Democrats, I think you'd find the same thing, is that they will criticize ICE on policy. They will not criticize ICE on funding. Mm-hmm. And the power of the purse is Congress's main thing. Yes, they do investigations, which Jeffries has talked about ad nauseum, like we will investigate, the ICE personnel who have accosted members of Congress or harassed them in various ways or not let them in facilities. At no point has he ever really made a serious threat to cut off their funding. And that's basically the one tool you have in Congress that makes you a serious actor. That basically defines the balance of power between the branches. Like the Congress, the president proposes and the Congress disposes. That means they have the power of the purse. So this is how I view it basically. And I think it's part of because I just have a weird view of politics where I see everything through the budget basically, because that's where my specialty is. But I don't see Democrats being serious about anything unless they're backing it up with like actual threats that affect the redistribution of wealth, the budget.
I'm sorry, just like they're loading the pistol up, right? And they're shooting it too, don't get me wrong. And then they're handing it to the madman, right? Like this whole situation here where like, you have like these increases in the ICE budget under Democratic control. You also, that on the other end, like there could be another kind of Trump figure. And like, unless they are so politically naive that they think that they sort of vanquish that threat, right? Or that there wouldn't be somebody who might use these powers in a way they might disagree with.
God forbid, David, because what are they going to run on if that threat was ever judged as vague? vanquished.
I mean, I think that that's also part of the reality too, is that like they're not too worked up about this. They like to be able to run against it. They like to be able to use it to mobilize and motivate people to donate and support the Democratic Party. But like the actual on the ground, they're not too worried about the consequences, or at least they accept them as a necessary part of their politics.
I mean, this sounds exactly like. Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
I was just saying they're insulated from it. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah. That sounds exactly like the conversation around military spending too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if it's the Democratic Party is basically like that commercial from like 2020 where it looks like Kylie Jenner or someone handing the Pepsi to the riot cops during the peak. That's basically the Democratic Party. It's like under no circumstances can you actually threaten the funding of the security apparatus, even though you know that if you lose control of the White House, that there's a good chance that something really, those, violent apparatuses will be used for something nefarious, typically at home. The anti-imperialist crowd, for those listening, because I know there's a bunch of listeners to this show, we're having a great time right now because we're talking about the imperial boomerang. We're talking about colonial reflection, Amy Césaire, Frantz Fanon, Michel Foucault. I mean, this is great. Hannah Arendt. We're talking about that, imperial blowback. We can talk about Chalmers Johnson as well. So we're just having a great time with all this. I mean, this graph that you pulled up here, I can't explain to you how long this graph took to put together. Oh my God. A lot of these graphs actually do, because they look like they're just like machine printed, but like, I swear to God, these things take forever.
Oh, I'm sure. Having fiddled with those things in the past, but I mean, this going back to like that kind of question of like colonialism and imperialism. I mean, this literally is those systems coming home, right? This is like the graphic budget form of all those arguments.
And just for folks listening, what we're looking at is a graph from Stephen's blog here. As U.S. troops, StephenSemler.com, as U.S. troops left Iraq, their combat gear went to police, and then just overlaid U.S. troops deployed in Iraq, and then value of Pentagon property acquired by U.S. police. And like, I feel like this was like part of Grand Theft Auto 5's like narrative, or maybe Grand Theft Auto Vice City, or like this sort of thing is what like pretty much any anti-war activist would say, like, this is what we got to look at, and it's just happened, like, and that graph proves it.
I can't explain, like, when I first saw that, when I first plotted it out, I was like, no fucking way. It's like, it lines up that closely. But I controlled for it, and I only looked at this one particular bit of equipment that was developed for Iraq, the MRAP, those giant like vehicles, mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles. The V is left out of the acronym, but I tracked those too, and it follows the same curve basically. So it makes sense. Like, once troops came back from Iraq, or at least most of them, because there's still U.S. troops there, but once the majority of U.S. troops come back from Iraq, their equipment followed them basically. And then the way the Pentagon system works, the way it deals with excess property, is it doesn't like to hold on to excess property, because that makes it harder to justify buying new stuff. There's actually a study, and forget that, and they hate buying new stuff. They don't like it to have it stored in warehouses either, so they offload it. And it's either to like the global periphery, the third world. I don't know what the PC term for it is now. Global South. That sounds wrong too.
Yeah, I think that.
But it either goes to like, enforcing order in a very poor country, or enforcing order in, a very rich country, but in, back in the metropole, basically. So a study found actually like how desperate the Pentagon is to get rid of excess equipment. 1/3 of the acquisitions that police get through this program, it's called the 1033 program. It's, how police acquire military equipment from the Pentagon for free. 1/3 of the equipment transferred through the program was brand new. It was never used by the Pentagon at all. And the really frustrating part about that graph is that it's really fixable, because the 1033 program, which again is this excess property program that delivers military equipment to police, it's a loan program technically. So that means you just get the commander-in-chief to say, okay, just sign an executive order, all equipment that's controlled property, which is the serious stuff. The uncontrolled property is like t-shirts and like computers and like excess equipment that's transferred to the program. But like the military gear, the actual military stuff, like the MRAPs that I mentioned, the guns, the grenade launchers that are used to fire either, usually just tear gas canisters and less lethal rounds at air quotes there, at reporters, basically, but what I'm saying is Biden could have just ended this program basically, and not only ended it, stopped the flow of it, but actually yanked military gear, taken military gear off the streets, and he didn't do it.
I mean, really, like what we're seeing right now in Los Angeles, and like in national politics, right? The attempts to like limit free speech, all this stuff. Like one, obviously, I think a lot of people are thinking about Gaza and what we have seen for years there. But there's another line I think that goes through this, and your graph, going back from 2003 to today, really highlights it, which is the fact that there are like two buttons that the government can press when it comes to funding, right? Because you have to like stimulate the economy somehow, right? You got to be able to put some money out to the public. And the one that the federal government likes to do is the military and just spend as much. That's like the one button that they press, because they don't want to like improve general like livelihoods and wages for everyday folks. But the military is the one thing that they'll sort of press because there is like a whole. We talked about this last week. The whole kind of cottage industry around military procurement. But then on the city and the municipal and the state level too, those budgets are completely gutted for social services for folks. Like the one budget that continues to rise and the button that they press is like the police budget, right? And seeing how those two things are so connected actually, between the Pentagon budget and then seeing that millions of that stuff being given for free, but to sort of facilitate, this violent but cheaper option than social spending on the municipal level. I mean, these things are deeply, deeply connected to like the bizarre country that we live in right now, where our government has tremendous amounts of money and tremendous amounts of resources, but there is a complete refusal to, I don't know, invest in like healthcare for people, or invest in education for people.
Yeah, I remember I did a breakdown of Trump's budget request, and basically what it shows is that 3/4 of it goes to military or federal police. And then one of the replies, actually more than one of the replies, was a graph from the LA controller, who does awesome work and makes a fellow graph aficionado, Kenneth Maya or something, Meija, I think. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'm a huge fan of his work. That dude, what he does is so impressive. And his graph for the LA city budget was like, it looked like the one I made for Trump's budget. So that speaks exactly to your point, David. It's like, I don't know which one came first really, but I suspect these two things are mutually reinforcing.
No, I mean, there's just I think there's fundamentally like American politics has been, kind of stuck in this monstrous cycle for so long that like it can't move out of neoliberalism, right? Politically, it's just like any kind of alternative that develops just returns to an even more and more violent one of it. I mean, what we're seeing with Trump right now, I mean, really is just like Reaganism, with a not what would be the opposite of a velvet glove. I mean, it's a fist, right? I mean, what we're seeing right now is like direct waging war on like American society, on American sociability, on like the American people, and we're also seeing like this heightened class war. And we have your this last graph that we'll show of yours that I think really outlines as well for the big quote, the big beautiful bill. What this really is a project of taking wealth away from the rest of the country and giving it to the wealthiest and most well off in this country. I can pull this up and sort of read out some of these for folks. The House GOP's big beautiful bill harms the bottom 60% of working age households. The bottom quintile under 17,000 is going to lose 29.5K. Second quintile, I'm just reading out for folks. Second quintile 17K to 51K will lose negative 13.3K. Third quintile 51K to 93K lose 1,300. And then we have the fourth quintile and the top quintile. The top quintile, just read that one. Change in household income by income group, 43.4K. The top quintile is people over 174K. I mean, could you talk about what what all these numbers mean and what this graph tells us?
Yeah, so what those numbers mean is that it's based on this Penn-Wharton budget model. And I don't really fetishize the Penn-Wharton budget model like other people. I don't know if people who've even heard this don't even know what I'm talking about. But basically, they projected the effects of the bill by income quintile. And what these numbers mean is that it basically assigns a value to what's gained or lost by the legislation so that they balance each other out. So a person in that top quintile, you said it was 43.3 thousand. Mm-hmm. That is the amount that a person in that quintile, you would approach the average person in that quintile, you would approach them with, say, 43 grand or the passage of the big, beautiful bill, and they wouldn't necessarily give a shit which one passed because they would benefit equally from each one, either receiving the 43 grand or the big, beautiful bill passing. Conversely, the people in the bottom quintile are basically told, okay, are basically being asked, would you rather have the big, beautiful bill passed or make a one-time nearly 30 grand payment to us, the government? Which is shocking, which is really quite shocking. One way, though, that I still think the big, beautiful bill, the GOP mega bill, is underrated in terms of its redistribution of wealth, because I don't think these models don't factor in these technicalities that come out as a result of the immense amount of money that this bill adds to the deficit. So this bill adds $2.4 trillion to the deficit. For perspective, the American Rescue Plan was 1.9 trillion. Okay, and this is just the effect on the deficit. So effectively, once because they're passing it through this process called reconciliation, which is basically your key to avoid the filibuster. And if you pass it through reconciliation, you have to play by a certain set of rules. And if your legislation one of them is if your legislation increases the deficit by a certain amount of money, you have to either sunset the provisions or you have to do this thing called pay-go. That actually might apply to bills outside of reconciliation as well, pay-as-you-go provision, which means that because the GOP bill adds so much to the deficit, it triggers automatic cuts to social welfare. So thankfully, Social Security is off the hook. Medicare is not. So there will be cuts to Medicare, required mandatory cuts to Medicare if this bill passes. I don't think those automatic cuts are factored into this analysis.
Wow.
It does factor in the cuts to Medicaid, which are I think the latest Congressional Budget Office estimate, which is the estimates that it's like the authoritative source, the one everyone uses. They estimate that 8 million people will lose Medicaid coverage under this bill, which is a ton. Now, the only part about the GOP mega bill that's being overrated is by people calling that the biggest Medicaid cut in history. That's not correct. I mean, because of Biden's 2023 omnibus bill, 25 million people were kicked off Medicaid. So that's the only bit I'm really claiming. That's the only I'm causing problems about. But I think it's underrated. Another reason besides the Medicare, automatic cuts is also like the social effects of cutting SNAP. Things like SNAP. So it's like, oh, you're not on SNAP? Cool. Me neither. But people who shop at my grocery store and your grocery store probably are. They are on SNAP. Now think for a second, if your grocery store, which may not be running on huge margins or have much, wiggle room in terms of margins, you're suddenly, if you're cutting off SNAP revenue for people, you're not only having to live with the moral problem of people just not being able to afford food, you're also potentially complicating your own life because suddenly your grocery store has a bunch less revenue coming in every day. So they either increase their prices or they close. And then you're forced to either walk or drive further to the next grocery store. And the next grocery store might be someplace like Whole Foods, where everything's more expensive and you have to deal with people who look like me.
You're not too bad, Stephen. No, but I mean, like, this is a really important point here. It's like, as you know, and everybody listening to this program knows, I mean, America is also a very income segregated part of the world. And, particularly in like rural or like less populated parts of the country, I mean, there are entire communities that are basically, dependent on these kind of programs that will disappear. And like, the effect is like beyond just like the individual, like, oh, I can't buy this or I can't buy that. Yeah, entire like economies that are kind of built up. With an expectation that there will be some kind of flow of capital into this community from these kind of programs. I mean, this will have massive effects. And as anybody who understands anything about business will know, you can't react to those things that quickly. Like, it creates a kind of chaos that will take years and years and years to get back to, again, like an equilibrium that I think all of us on this program don't think is working well enough for people. But just to get back to like maybe where we are right now, I mean, this will have knock-on effects politically, economically, socially, geographically. I'm curious, like how you are categorizing, this bill, in terms of like other kind of Republican fever dreams or things like that. Because to me, it seems kind of like code red danger to like the future of the country.
Yeah, and the problem is like it's so quintessentially Republican. Like there's so many things about it. Like it does what Reagan does. Like for example, like student loans, for example, it enhances benefits for student loans for active duty military personnel, but it cuts it for anything else like income or any other form of national service that gets cut. So basically, what Republicans are doing is saying, we don't believe that the government serves any real, legitimate purpose except as being a security apparatus. We're okay with having, the legacy Social Security and Medicare programs for now. But basically, we don't want the budget that Congress votes on every year, what's called the discretionary budget, that's outside those big trust funds like Social Security and Medicare. We want that to be pretty much 100% to the security apparatus, meaning the Pentagon, meaning ICE, meaning CBP, FBI, and the courts, basically, in course, Bureau of Prisons and the Justice Department. Yeah.
Security, right?
Security.
The securing stuff that makes us all feel so secure.
Speaking of what, I will jump off that point, Matt. So there's what you'll hear me talking about like later probably is that like there are limits to the discourse on inequality. Because what I was just talking about earlier, it's like I'm worried that people like see like a graph showing the upward redistribution of wealth and thinking, yeah, that's unfair, but what am I going to do about it? And it doesn't, I worry that like approaching someone who isn't really interested in politics saying, how are you supposed to feel inequality? Insecurity, though, defined as sort of like food insecurity, financial hardship, those sort of things that people in the international development sector have been calling this human security since 1994, I think. Or earlier, it was just formalized in 1994. This human security dynamic, food, housing, rights to electricity, that sort of thing, adequate income, that sort of thing. People can feel insecure along those lines, but they may not be able to relate to inequality generally. So I'm just kind of, one thing I'm figuring out now, and I don't know why I chose to, this live program to like, hash this out, think about it, figure it out basically. But I think there has to be a new discourse on insecurity that really poses a countervailing force to the enforcing order, militarized version of security that is being foisted upon us. That is in no way emancipatory or, increases your, ability to survive or really improves your security at all. But that's where I think Democrats are just not offering an alternative vision right now that speaks to the type of like insecurity that I care about.
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff about, they get stuck on morality when you just look at the political economy and what we're doing to it, which is whether it's, CHIP, there are grocery stores that are not going to get those funds. So who cares about, you don't care about feeding hungry people. Okay, we get that. Do you want grocery stores to close? Same thing with hospitals, right? Like, do we want people, half of rural births are covered by Medicaid. Yep. Do we want those funds? Okay, so say you don't give a fuck about poor people having kids in rural America or 40% of births up in the rest of the country. Say you don't give a shit about that. Do you want those hospitals to close too because they're not getting those funds? It's so fucking, it's penny wise and just like civilizationally foolish.
Yeah. I agree, David. You have something to add there?
No, I mean, it is one of those things where, I try to understand the conservative mind, at least like the arguments that they might kind of make about these things. But, a lot of this stuff is so beyond just the kind of like, cruelty of regular GOP politics. I mean, really, these kind of things are going to have just such massive effects as we've been talking about. That like the purpose. I mean, like my assumption is always like, oh, well, their hope will be that like the private private institutions will be able to kind of step in and make some money off of this. But the problem is like there won't be any money for them to make off of this because they've cut off the flow of money. To like if you wanted to just be a nasty Republican, just find a way for more private business to basically take advantage of like the social welfare state, right? And for them to be the ones who get the contracts, deliver the services, and they can bilk some money off of it. But instead, what they're doing is they're just cutting off the entire flow of money, which means vast swaths of this country are going to be without access to food, healthcare, and all these kind of things. What really is the purpose? It's harder to understand, at least in how I typically view Trump politics, which is always somebody's trying to make a buck off of what this is.
Yeah, I think the military spending portion of this bill in particular is, I think, one of the most egregious parts and the most underrated part. Not just because, oh, by the way, so I've been not on Capitol Hill literally, but like having meetings with Capitol Hill. What I've heard from actually multiple people is that House Democratic leadership instructed its rank and file members not to go after the military spending portion of the GOP mega bill.
Incredible.
I heard from someone else who was on Capitol Hill as well that they said the same thing. I said, okay, yeah, that's what I heard too. But they also said that Democratic leadership gave that instruction to not cut the Homeland Security part, the ICE part, the deportation part either. Okay, wow. So
yeah,
breaking some news here. So I see a major problem here. And here's why I think the military spending part is the most egregious. It's the most egregious in terms of redistribution of wealth. So the bill basically guarantees $12 to $15 billion in military contracts to Elon Musk. Regardless of the feud, billionaires will, be rude to each other in public, but ultimately I view this as class war and billionaires will have each other's backs. Plus, Trump and Musk both hate Gavin Newsom. So they'll be, I think, reunited, and I think they'll mend their differences anyway. Not that anyone really cares about it. The other thing, why those sort of models I think are quite good, showing the redistributive effects and like the loss in income that people experience at each income quintile, is that they don't factor in the opportunity cost of that military spending or that Homeland Security spending. So in total, like the Homeland Security and ICE budget for deportations generally is $140 billion. This is what I think the Immigration Forum said. Yeah, the military spending portion is $150 billion. Wow. Sorry, did I just log off my computer?
No.
Okay, good. It's actually 150.3 billion. But whatever. So by opportunity cost, let me just pitch this for you. The cost of those $600 stimulus checks from January 2021. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
So they reduced. The before and after is actually quite shocking. They were accompanied by different policies, but like even just the $600 check, the smallest of the three, reduced hunger by 6 million people and reduced financial hardship by 9 million people. The cost was $141 billion. So you're looking at these two things where it's like, okay, if you just get rid of the security component of this and you just refund the taxpayers for the money that would have been spent anyway, it's deficit neutral. And you're basically giving people another $1,200 check, which kind of irritates me about those models. So,
and maybe somebody should call this guy RFK about that. We can talk to him about why we can deal with the hunger epidemic in this country.
Help folks out. He for sure cares about that.
Yeah, he definitely loves. He's definitely very worried about it. First of all, Stephen, it's always so great to have you on the program. People should definitely go back and listen to the last time we had you on the program. It's one of our most popular episodes ever, where we broke down the reasons why Kamala Harris lost the election. It was phenomenal. I just wanted to ask you, no pressure or anything, but is there anything that you don't have to have any, inside knowledge or data, but like, is there anything that you're kind of watching or kind of looking out for as, we start to see the effects of these kind of Trump policies that might have those kind of shifts in the country and in our politics, particularly about, the well-being of everyday folks?
I think that the continued deterioration of everyday security, human security, working class security, whatever you want to call it, that basic, like fundamental state of being will continue to be more poignant. I mean, things will get worse is what I'm trying to say. if you aren't directly experiencing financial hardship, but you have in the past, that shit stays with you. Speaking from personal experience, that shit will not leave. And you will feel insecure, even if you're within, just even smelling or seeing distance, whatever, of that, the abyss. Like, you will basically feel insecure, not just because of, maybe not because of your actual status of income and your access to food or housing or whatever, but because you're close to experiencing that, and you will feel insecure for that reason. I think it's really a matter of whether there's going to be an opposition party that is going to speak to those concerns. It's going to ask very, very simple questions. Why is there record homelessness year after year? Last year, Democrats decided to blame migrants. This year, they don't have the immigration excuse because Biden deported a record number of people last year, apparently. Trump is doing so this year. So the only thing to look at is the collapse of, the welfare super state that was erected during the COVID pandemic, during which time prices have increased and wages have not. So I think it's really I think those variables we talked about on that episode, which was great, by the way. I got a lot of new subscribers off that. Like, some actually wrote me saying you found me from the show. It's great because I love Left Reckoning. So it's like, my passion and my love for the show combined, which made me feel really good. I think all those variables that we discussed, I think we talked about poverty, child poverty, real term that exists somehow, food insecurity, all those things that I mentioned, they're going to get worse, and homelessness as well. So I'm keeping a track of those variables. I think, like, the Census Bureau had this household pulse survey that had evolved into something else. So I'm just keeping an eye out for those new statistics as they come out. Because really, like, my last quote unquote real job was in the humanitarian sector, where you have those variables. Like, I worked with Syria, and you just had abundance of those variables, but somehow in the first world, we don't have access to, like, monitor actually how people are doing. And as we talked about in the show, ignoring those things really cost Democrats. And I think, Musk says, "Oh, well, we have a mandate to do X." No, you don't have a mandate. People are upset about. What are you talking about, dude? What are you actually talking about? I think it was really like a function of the two-party system, where you can't really fire someone without hiring the other person. And I think that's what happened. And Democrats were just so negligent when it came to actual people's lived experiences, that people were saying, okay, you're going to give the middle finger to us, we're going to give the middle finger to you. And we're just going to say, yeah, like, by every objective measure, things were better in 2019 regarding the variables that we were talking about. So Trump has no answers. I think it'll be revealed as a scam. And the question for Democrats, and, is, do we want to actually provide a vision that actually appeals to people? Or are we just going to continue playing this, back and forth, bipartisan ping pong with the electorate, where whatever party's in power pisses the electorate off, and they go back to the other party, and then they go back to the other party, and that sort of thing. We're just stuck in that cycle. For now, this is my last comment on this, it looks like the Democrats are choosing to be useless. I mean, the abundance agenda it sounds like they just held an essay writing contest, the Democratic Party did, saying, you have to sound like you're doing something interesting and radical and important, but you can't really mess around with the redistribution of wealth. You can't raise taxes. You can't challenge the security apparatus, and you can't really change how the party goes about its business, basically. So now we have this thing that, it's just like, that people just have, like, it doesn't poll as well as populism. It's like, what are people supposed to do with this? Like,
well, because they're afraid of populism. And I mean, this is the thing. I think that there's just a kind of hope that they can, ride these ups and downs. And as we talked about on this program too, everybody needs to remember in politics that, like, winning elections isn't always as important as building a kind of political apparatus and getting campaign money. And running successful campaigns, can sometimes just mean raising a lot of money and spending a lot on your friends and consultants and all of that, and not necessarily winning and delivering for folks. And I think, I hope, and I'm optimistic always, that, like, something can kind of break out of this. But I do think that we might just kind of be stuck in a perpetual 2016 extreme political situation for a long time. Go ahead, Matt.
I would just like to enter this into the discussion. A guy I'm
authoritarian.
Completely in the bag for. I didn't expect him to go where he goes with this statement here on the ICE raids.
It is authoritarianism. It is an example of what the Trump administration is already doing across this country and hopes to bring to cities from coast to coast. What we deserve in this moment is a mayor who can look that authoritarianism in the eye and not see a reflection of himself.
Incredible. I mean, serious, like that is about as good as it gets from a politician at any level. And let's also not forget that this is somebody, just running for a municipal spot here.
That was beautiful. That was damn near poetry. I've never heard that. Wow.
He's coming hard. So yeah, that's just I have to do Zohran little plug because I'm in the tank for him.
I mean, no, I'll just say, like, on the optimism side, like Zohran, I think it is one of the most important elections, not just because, not in like a New York centric way or anything like that. It is somebody running a campaign on like an actual distinct political alternative certainly to the Republicans, but also to that kind of middle of the road Democratic politics represented maybe by somebody like Cuomo, but also, I'm sorry, to like a lot of the limp, quote unquote, progressivism that we've seen in this country for a long time. That's very scared of having bold politics, taking on their own party. I mean, it is one of those things that, like, you hope he wins, and the bigger hope is that this kind of inspires a lot of folks like that to start running for office in the next cycle.
I agree, and I really think, like, what makes it so frustrating in Democrats' resistance to doing this is
they
that
don't want to win, man. I mean, it's kind of simple.
I think when you've probably been asked at some point, like, were Democrats trying to lose in the past election? It's like, okay, they may have tried their hardest when, at the very moment the election was taking place, but they deliberately put themselves in a losing position. It's like, it's like if you two, like, so I love volleyball, play volleyball, that sort of thing. You two come up, you show up to a beach volleyball tournament I'm playing in to support your pal, Stephen, friend of the show. And I have a really good chance of winning. But when you turn up, you see me dressed in chaps and chromed cowboy boots. Yeah. It's clear that I'm trying my hardest on the court, but it's also clear that for whatever reason, I've chosen that apparel and it's really affecting my performance. Sand is building up in my boots and presumably in my crack, if you'll pardon the image. And I'm just not playing as well because I just deliberately put myself in this really dumb position for no freaking reason. It's really, it's frustrating because, like, Democrats need to basically ask the public simple questions and then provide legitimate, solid answers to them. Like, if you are a couple that's living in a decently sized place and have a double income and you're both working full-time jobs, why aren't you rolling in it? You really should be rolling in it. For so much of human history, it was one income source. I'm not saying go back to those times, by the way. I'm just posing a question, like, why is suddenly, like, now, like, raising a child by yourself? I don't even know how people do it. At all. Even if they're not living in an expensive city or whatever out in the wilderness, you still have excess costs. You still have to pay for childcare, that sort of thing. But that's what I'm talking about. It's just like the answers are, like, right there. Polling shows that, like, people are, looking for answers to that sort of thing. And right now it's just kind of like a battle between, okay, we have a narrative of, like, the ruling classes stealing your lunch, or it's the immigrants stealing your lunch. And the former is the only one that's backed up by data.
The difference is, I think, kind of easy to understand, that they don't view winning the same way we view winning. And just like a Democrat can win, but we don't see it as a real win, they could see Democrat win and not see it as a real win either. If all of a sudden, like, Bernie Sanders or maybe an anti-Zionist got into power, they don't want to win like that. And they're not going to try to create a coalition of people that want to win like that. They'd rather send Richie Torres and Bill Clinton to stick their thumb in their eye and say, actually, fuck you, go someplace else. We will lose this election. Like, and to them, you look at their bank accounts, they're kind of still winning, a little bit. So, I think that's, but I think you're about the Zohran thing and then inspiration. No one's inspired by that shit. I saw some people being like, why, if we just had, if Zohran just had normal liberal politics, he'd be winning this election or whatever. It's like,
no
you
way.
Don't get people, you don't get that kind of charisma. You get that once, and you had it with Obama, and you did Obamacare with it. You ain't getting that coming around again. And because none of the people that have your politics had lives like even Zohran did. He's a rapper from Uganda. Like, he's done crazy shit. You don't do all that stuff and be a milquetoast liberal. I don't think so.
man.
Well,
Go ahead.
no, I mean we're all Zohran pilled. I was just gonna say, thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us and being on the program. And people should definitely subscribe to Polygraph, and you should let Stephen know that you came over from Left Reckoning. We have the link down below. Is there anything else? I mean, we have your Twitter and all that as well for people to follow. Is there anything else people should be keeping up with?
I don't know. I was just going to probably plug your guys' Patreon, because I would say it's about time you had a notable guest on here. I love that. Rokana, by the way, I thought that was great.
Oh, thank you.
But yeah, I mean, definitely reward Left Reckoning for their excellent choice in guests. And make sure you're talking about me.
Thank you, Stephen.
Well, appreciate it so much, Stephen. We'll have to do it again soon.
Absolutely, man. Anytime. Take care, guys. Do you want me to hang up?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Thanks again, Stephen. We appreciate it. I'm serious, y'all. Polygraph is an incredible resource. We use it for a lot of our research here. And Stephen's also a great follow on Twitter.
I mean, I remember 10 years or so ago at NYU, we used to do classes on like data visualization and the new frontiers. And, there's few people that are actually living that life. And
also using it for good. A lot of the data visualization is kind of like evil, scummy, third way stuff. So we appreciate someone like Stephen, coming through all that for the rest of us. Folks, you think we're done? We're just getting started. We got a whole show for y'all, and I'm going to announce we're doing something very special this summer for our friends. I hope y'all enjoy it. A party's always nice when you invite more folks, and Matt and I have decided to revive an old Left Reckoning tradition, summer post games. So tonight and for the rest of the summer, we're going to have post games open to all. We still do really need your support, and you can support us over at patreon.com/leftreckoning, and you get access to this show now with these big summer post games. And our Sunday shows. Sunday shows, some people say Sunday shows are our best shows, Matt. I actually would probably agree.
people are really loving our Sunday shows.
And if you've only been watching the main show, you've only been getting 1/3 of what we do. Tonight, you'll be able to see the other side of the post game. And if you subscribe at patreon.com/leftreckoning, you'll be able to get those Sunday shows where Matt and I are usually getting into some trouble. So support us and come hang out over there. But we got a little bit.
Follow us on Twitch too for folks.
Oh yeah,
I like to diversify the streams a little.
It's nice to diversify the streams for sure. And also, I think Matt always has a dream that one day he's going to be able to not have to talk politics and just do the airplane simulator or whatever that game is that you play.
It's been a while since I've done airplane simulator, to be honest.
I guess your NBA.
I've just been playing 2K.
Yeah.
My PS5 has just been a 2K machine.
Well, folks, we're going to jump over to this conversation that we had with the nation. 160 years, 160-year anniversary edition is out now. There's links below for people to read it. It is super good. I won't overload the introduction too much. Check it out. I mean, it's very much in the spirit of Left Reckoning. They took a look at all 50 states. They had writers, artists, and other folks had pieces commissioned about every single state in the U.S. I found it to be a very interesting issue. I hope you all check it out and enjoy it as well. But let's get over that conversation. Then Matt and I will be back on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, while I'm bringing that up, how many publications have been publishing for that long?
No, not too many. And as you always like to note, unlike the National Review, it's a publication that's very proud of its history. And you can go and read through the archives through that.
The National Review has been publishing about half the time, and we'll give you even half of that archive.
For folks who know, National Review has kind of hit a lot of their more unsavory positions.
They were saying some stuff about Rhodesia and Southern Africa and civil rights in America that, look, they need a lot of nuance to understand fully. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, here is this interview, and we'll be back with some more fun after that.
Welcome back, Left Reckoners. The Nation magazine is turning 160 years old, and they're releasing a real doorstopper of an anniversary issue. It's just going to take a special look at these disunited states. It includes a kind of road trip through the country with pieces from all 50 states. And as folks who listen to this program will know, it's very much in the spirit of Left Reckoning, looking at parts of the country that don't always get a lot of coverage. I'm really thrilled to be joined today by two guests, the Nation magazine editor, Dee Guttenplan, and Nation contributing writer and author of Fear No Pharaoh, American Jews, the Civil War, and the Fight to End Slavery, Richard Kreitner. Thank you all so much for coming on the program.
It's great to be with you.
Thank you, David.
Well, I mean, there's plenty to talk about, plenty to cover, but maybe to get us started, what is the state of the nation? I mean, when y'all were commissioning these pieces and reading through it, I mean, what is the sense amongst the people who are writing and contributing to the Nation?
Well, I'll field that one, maybe to begin with, which is, we turn 160 on July 6th, and the Nation is not only 160 years old, but we've been in New York for 160 years. And in fact, before we became a magazine, we existed as an idea in the brain of Frederick Law Olmsted, who has had a lot to do with shaping New York City, a designer of Central Park and Prospect Park. And the Nation was really his idea. And the idea was an honest weekly paper, meaning that even in 1863, when he had the idea, there was a problem with the media not always telling the truth. So we've been around for a long time. And as Richard says in his introduction, a couple of times in the last century, we've marked a significant anniversary by taking a look at what were called at that time these United States. And I'll let him discuss those. But we felt that given the current situation in the country, and my predecessor, but one, Victor Navasky, used to say, "What's bad for the country is good for the nation." So the state of the magazine at the moment is more robust, perhaps, than we'd like it to be. But the state of the country is not the same, and we decided that it was better to look forward and outward rather than backward. So we had done, and I had worked with Richard on a comprehensive history of the nation for our 150th anniversary 10 years ago. But we decided this time we were going to look at the ground level and look outwards. So that's how this came about. But in terms of why these disunited rather than united and the history of those concepts, I defer to Richard.
Yeah, I mean, when you were pulling these pieces together, Richard, I mean, what are these kind of the themes that we're getting from all of these different writers, poets, and artists across the country?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we gave them a pretty wide remit as to what they wanted to address, just this idea of union or disunion, as the case may be, and, the fraying of the ties that hold us together as a country, or in some cases did not. One of the themes I think that we like to highlight in the magazine overall is the divisions that have always defined American society, divisions across race, class, the type of things that are not going to be any kind of breaking news for your listeners, have always been the theme of the coverage of the Nation, even though, as I write in the introduction, it's called the Nation because it's trying to kind of call into being some new form of being America than that which existed before the Civil War and the founding of the country. So we didn't really know exactly what we would get back, except that we knew that we were writing to and commissioning writers and artists of substance and of great insight, some of whom we had worked with before, others of whom we merely admired from afar, and we're really thrilled to get them into the magazine for the first time. So the portrait of the country that comes back, also no breaking news to the listeners, I think is of a really kind of wounded and battered and nearly broken one, quite honestly, a place where the arts are being defunded everywhere, where local textures and differences and distinctions are being smothered and really evaporated. So it's not great news, I would say, but there's also a lot of, I think readers will find a lot of little glimmers of hope even, and of projects of kind of radical revisioning and renewal really taking place all across the country. Protests against Cop City in Atlanta, our contributor in Georgia writes about everything from that, from organized political mass action to our contributor from Delaware writing about, making sourdough bread as a form of daily resistance, which I take seriously. Love sourdough.
And also the Delaware piece was, it ends with hang on. It's a kind of, it is a very hopeful piece.
And I'll tell folks, one, they should already be reading The Nation. But if you've been listening to this podcast over the years, I mean, a lot of left-right guests, are featured in this. My old professor, Luke Mayville, our friend Terrence Ray is in this, Gus
beautiful.
Bova, of course. So it's definitely something that is right up your alley to the listener. Well, I mean, this is, I think, it's a very interesting thing, I think, to take stock of the country. I think that sometimes politics, we have such a focus on national politics that we sort of miss all of these movements that are, happening underneath the surface, both good and bad, right? These developments from the right wing, for example, like here in Texas, to some of those things like Cop City, the fight against Cop City in Georgia that y'all were talking about. Do y'all think that the reason that we feel so bad and disunited and worried about the state of the country, is that just one of those things where it always feels bad in the moment politically, right? You're always sort of worried that, we're not winning, that we're not in power. Or is there something unique about 2025 right now that is worse than, let's say, the first Trump presidency, or worse than when Bush came into office, at the beginning of the 2000s? I mean, is this moment more dire than ones in y'all's telling?
I think it's more dire. I mean, I was covering the first Trump administration, and I became editor of The Nation in 2019 when Trump was still in office the first time. I covered his election in 2016. And, he came into office, and there was a sense, and maybe this is wrong, but I think there was a fairly widespread sense that he hadn't expected to win that election. And so, it's not like they hit the ground running. It's not like they had a game plan that was well thought out. And in fact, he was reliant on a lot of Republican establishment figures to kind of credential him. And that meant that they also, to a certain extent, acted as a restraining influence. All of that's gone. I mean, I think, there's an editorial in the issue by Michelle Goodwin, which isn't part of our 50 states package, but it's about Jane Crow. And she draws the parallels between Plessy versus Ferguson and the state of women's rights in the country now in the wake of Dobbs. And essentially the idea that we are once again a country with two judicially recognized separate and unequal classes of citizens. You have women who in some states have full autonomy and control over their reproduction. And then you have women in states that don't recognize that. And that the Supreme Court says that's just tough luck. So, I try not to be a panic monger, and I don't think panicking helps anybody. I don't think it's a good political response. But I would say that this is pretty dire and as serious as I've seen it in my lifetime, and I'm about to be 68 years old.
Yeah, I mean,
Ricky, do you want to gloss that more optimistically?
I mean, I've seen, I was here for the first Trump administration. I've seen Bush. I'm not quite as seasoned, but I do know history. I do know American history. I do know that it's been dire at many points before, which is not in any way to kind of undermine the seriousness of the present, simply to say that the nation was around when Plessy v. Ferguson was handed down. We were around when it was overturned, and there's always been work to do, always. And there's no point in not taking that as seriously as it deserves at every turn, And I would agree with John. I think we're in definitely one of the most dire positions that we've been in anybody alive's living memory. But the first time that this series ran in the nation, These United States, which was this collection of essays from major writers, Edmund Wilson on New Jersey, Willa Cather on Nebraska, H.L. Mencken, a bunch of other major writers in the 1920s. That was also a moment of major crisis, of oligarchy, of huge corruption at the federal level. By the 1930s, the nation is chronicling every week this crisis over democracy. Will it survive the worldwide crisis of the Great Depression? And the magazine's just always been at that fight, and always, I think, not crying that the sky is falling, as Don said in so many words, but but pointing out seriously the ills of our society and pointing to ways to fix them. So the fight is kind of as it has always been. We're just facing currently a president with absolutely no regard whatsoever for the Constitution or for any of the norms of our democratic life.
And, you know, I will say one of the things that is kind of worrying today, even bringing up, you know, taking a long view of American history, is that it really seems like the left as a, you know, political movement is probably the most unorganized that it has ever been in a lot of ways, right? There's been some glimmers of hope, you know, certainly after, for example, Bernie Sanders' run, 2016 growth of organizations like the DSA. There has been a resurgence, let's say, of like progressive politics in this country for sure. But after 2020, it feels like a lot of that kind of politics sort of hit a wall, and there's been 5 years of trying to figure out a way to reinvigorate some kind of political hope. I mean, do y'all share that view that, you know, the left right now seems to be very, very disorganized, and then broader, you know, on a more broad level, the Democratic Party leadership seems to have no real serious plan for how to confront Trump right now.
Do you want to go first on that, Rich?
Not really.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. I just didn't want to presume. No, I would say that the state of the left, you know, you talk about a left reckoning, and we've written many times in the last several months that a reckoning is needed. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me anyway, that what happened in 2020 was the Democratic establishment succeeded in putting off a reckoning within the party about what had happened in 2016, that it engineered, I mean, I wouldn't call it a coup, but it engineered an end to the Bernie Sanders challenge and a containment of the forces he represented by slipping in Biden, who had not been doing well in the primaries, but they had the pretext of COVID to stop the campaign. And, you know, they also had Bernie's complicity in saying or appearing to agree with the premise that Joe Biden had the best chance to beat Trump. And given the threat of a second Trump administration, the party needed to unite. Now, you can litigate that and relitigate that, and I'm not that interested in that. All I'll say is that having put that reckoning off in 2020, by 2025, it was really beginning to stink. You know, and my view is that the Democratic Party is not going to move forward until we have that reckoning. And in fact, until we fight that civil war within the party about whether it's only going to be a party that's united when they are supporting a corporate centrist candidate. And whenever there's a left candidate, that gives license to the party consultants and the party establishments and people like James Carville to, you know, undermine them and accept dollars from Republican donors and, you know, to defame and destroy progressive Democrats. And meanwhile, we're supposed to rally around the party flag when they nominate centrist candidates. So I think that has to be fought out. About the state of the left in America, well, you know, you've got to really take a long view. And if you take a long view, you know, this is not a period of left strength. I guess I would also say that and this is going to sound weird in response to your question, but I think Aaron Breitbart was right that politics is downstream of culture, and that that until we stop basing our progressive culture on our differences and find a way to forge a common cultural language on the left that isn't about separating and identifying and denigrating and decertifying people, the left is going to remain fractured and impotent. How's that for an optimistic view?
I think I've got an even less optimistic view, if possible, which is that I don't really know that this is a governable country by the left under our present constitutional system, which gives each state 2 votes, no matter what the population is of that state. And I came to the conclusion many years ago.
And wrote a book about it. Let's get the title of the book.
Yeah.
That, you know, it might be only on the local level that we're able to really make a fundamental difference in this country. And that's part of my interest in this issue, you know, and in the kind of ideas that came back to us from all these writers, many of whom are focusing after many years of despair and banging our heads against the wall of both trying to kind of take over the Democratic Party and then also the country, and really not having much effect in that, starting to kind of look inwards or look closer to home and cultivate our own, community gardens, so to speak, to adapt Voltaire. That's my view of it. Yeah.
No, I mean, well, I think I understand, that point, and sort of looking particularly on the local level, on the state level for doing politics. But I think one of the difficulties, and I'm curious what y'all think about this after putting together this issue, is that even though obviously like you can engage a lot on the local level, so much of politics seems to be driven at the national level. I'll tell you, like, it's very hard for us to get people to view or watch our kind of Texas politics coverage stories versus whatever's happening in Washington, D.C., right? There is a lot more attention and attraction to these large national stories. And also, in many ways, I feel like the country, the distinction of the different regions has sort of waned in the past few years. I mean, a lot of the country feels a lot more similar than I imagine it probably did in like the 1970s or the 80s, or even go further back than that. I mean, when you're putting together, this issue here, how did you see, people sort of reckoning with like their local politics, like their local situation with the larger national struggle? Or did you find that, a lot of it was sort of reacting to the state of national politics from the vantage point of like wherever they're writing from?
I would say that it depends on where they're writing from. We were talking about this in the office the other day about whether one can reverse Tip O'Neill's adage that all politics is local, and that maybe in 2025 it feels more like all politics is national. That even in a mayoral race in New York City, what people care about is who's going to stand up most to Trump. It reaches right down to small races. And you could argue that this is a consequence of the Republican Party's success and the right's success in organizing down to the school board level, and that maybe the left is finally catching up to that. But in any case, there is a way that it does feel that all politics has become national, except that if you're in a state like Florida, where the governor is way ahead of the national curve for repression, or if you're in a state like Texas, or if you're in a state like South Carolina, where they're building incarceration facilities and they haven't said who they're going to put in them yet, then the local can also turn around and bite you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is increasingly correct. The nationalization of American politics and local politics and state races and municipal races, I simply lament that and think that puts the left at a disadvantage for a variety of reasons. I'm thinking of a piece from Vermont, actually, which is a state that Don has a lot of connections to, by Sue Halpern, where she's talking about the defunding of, I believe, the transportation department at the state and local level, and how now there's a ballot initiative in her very small Vermont town to raise funds for a bond issuance, I believe, in order to fund these operations that used to be funded via the state and federal appropriations. And they're going to struggle to be able to fulfill all of these services that were previously provided. And that's going to be going on all around the country. Things are going to begin to start breaking down, and on levels that local taxpayers are not going to be able to necessarily pick up the bill. And people are going to really start to feel this kind of corrosion in their own lives, I think. And perhaps start to miss some of these larger kind of mutual aid efforts that were constitutive of our functioning federal government, such as it was.
Well, I think that's also, it's something that most of us on the left haven't thought about, I think, as seriously as we should, which is, what is the appropriate scale for the commons? It's like, if you're a socialist, as I am, then you think that the commons should be expanded. You think that healthcare should be free. You think that education should be free all the way through college. You think that, your model of a public institution is a library where nobody asks you to prove your need. You just show up and prove that you belong to the community, and they give you a card and you can take out books. But, most libraries are funded locally. And, that's on the one hand. And on the other hand, without federal dollars, there are some services that will never be adequately delivered. So there's a way in which, the Project 2025 contains a blueprint for destroying the commons and dismantling it and scaling it back so that nobody has to contribute mutual aid to their neighbor, and we can all retreat to our selfish silos and, watch social media and maybe Trump reality TV. But if we want to expand the commons, and if we want to expand the network and the web of mutual aid that bonds us, not just as a country, but as communities, we probably ought to also be thinking and talking more about what level is the right level for the things we want to do together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's you're getting to something really important that I've been sort of wrestling with is a lot of the political, I think, difficulties that we face right now as a country and on the left, like come from a kind of like antisocial project that has been going on for a long time. We could call that capitalism. Hell, you look at the Republican Party in Texas, and not only are they doing horrendous things, stripping away people's rights, but you look at the abortion bill where they had a bounty on it to snitch on your neighbor, right? And so not only is it okay, we're restricting people's freedoms and their rights, creating a kind of environment for people where you have to look out because your neighbor might try to get you, right? I mean, that creates a distrust, even amongst people who share like our kind of progressive politics. I mean, people are very, very worried here about coming out and sharing their views on, let's say, Palestine and on all these kind of things. I mean, yeah, this kind of like anti-social project of the right. I'm curious if you agree with that, Richard.
I do agree with that. And I think Don was saying something earlier to suggest that part of our job should really be not mirroring that on the left, And there's a great piece in the issue by the essayist John Jeremiah Sullivan, who also has separately a great piece in the current Harper's anniversary issue about Mark Twain that everybody should read. But his piece in our 160th anniversary issue, he lives in North Carolina, has for many, many years, I believe. And his piece is about how do you deal with neighbors whose political views we find absolutely abhorrent, and yet in whom we want to see and really have no choice but to see a glimmer of humanity and shared humanity, and also shared citizenship, in a certain way. We can't give up on people just because we find their views or even their actions totally abhorrent. And I feel like that, starting from that basis, and he writes very kind of vulnerably and beautifully about this, I think has to be kind of the starting point of some kind of larger pro-social approach to doing politics and living together in a, ultimately very mixed society, wherever we are.
I want to agree with that and also add a slightly curmudgeonly perspective, which is, there seemed to be a time in the last decade where socialists spent more time denouncing each other than trying to build a common society. If our aim is the cooperative commonwealth, it seemed that we spent much less time imagining, dreaming, and working towards the cooperative commonwealth than in deciding, who's not eligible to get into it. And I feel like maybe now that we're so far from power that we have no choice but to reflect, maybe we could reflect and decide that pro-social activities are actually important.
I mean, I can't tell you how much I agree with that. I've been doing a lot of research on the Texas Socialist Party back in the 1910s. It was a very fascinating movement. And, they would have in the summer these huge encampments where literally thousands of people would come and spend the weekend, sweating underneath the Texas sun and building community. Like, yes, they're talking about politics. Yes, they're talking about socialism, but there's dancing, there's barbecue. It was a major part of people's social life. And, it's hard to organize anything in this country, to be fair, right? But we have to figure out how to be able to do something like that, because these were kind of poor, not very well connected farmers being able to do this kind of thing, over a century ago. And you sort of want to, to see how we can maybe invigorate some of that today. I mean, I'd also add as well, Could you imagine coming into the room in the sense of like, even if you listen to like left-wing podcasts or read a lot of the things that they're put out, you see all of these kind of fights. And I think if I'm somebody who might be interested in left ideas and socialist ideas, and I start looking into left-wing media, and this is, I'm including myself in this, you know, there aren't really as many conversations about those kind of like fundamental fiery goals that kind of inspire people and bring them and draw them into the movement. It's a lot of inner fighting, right? And if you come into the room, if you're interested in maybe engaging in politics, and your first experience of conversation is like two people going on about something that you don't understand, waging very personal wars against one another, it doesn't create a sense of like, oh, this is a group of people that I want to spend a lot of time with engaging with.
Say what you will about the Guttenplan era nation. I don't think that applies to the magazine in recent years, which has none of that type of feel. I would tell those people to read The Nation.
We try to run a big tent, and you know, when you're talking about Texas socialists in the 1920s, I always think of my North Star, which is the populists of the 1880s and 1890s, and the Chautauquas that they held, you know, which brought wagon loads of people to, you know, fields in Nebraska, Kansas, and in the South too. And exactly, I mean, you know, there's that famous Emma Goldman quote: "If I can't dance, I don't want to go to your revolution." And I sort of feel like, and if I can't have barbecue, maybe maybe I don't want to go either. Or at least we ought to have more room for barbecue.
We're pro barbecue socialism here at Left Reckoning.
Good.
Well, Richard and Don, I mean, really wonderful to have you all on the program. People should definitely subscribe to The Nation and get this upcoming edition. Is there anything else that we can plug for y'all?
Yeah, you could plug two things, and you may want to lead into them. So if it's up to you, but you know, one is the long historical arc of the left and the assembly of a majoritarian radical coalition is something I wrote about in my book, The Next Republic. So, you know, it hasn't happened, but but the roadmap is out there. And, you know, we're talking about secession. And because I know that Richard is someone who is a great scholar of secession and a sometime partisan of forms of secession, I allowed myself to write a piece for the New York entry advocating secession for New York City. And so far, none of the mayoral candidates have picked up that banner. But again, it's out there if anybody wants it. And I meant it. I think New York City would do much better on its own than as part of New York State. And we should stop letting Albany oppress us.
Yeah, well, you mentioned my book, Fear No Pharaoh, came out in April, about American Jews and the struggle over slavery in the Civil War. And I also just started this podcast called Think Back, in which I'm interviewing U.S. historians about their new books and old books of new relevance. So if anyone's interested in U.S. history, you can check that out. Think Back.
Oh, hell yeah. We'll have links to all that below. Again, Richard and Don, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, David.
Great job,
Oh,
David.
yeah. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, appreciate it. No, it was really wonderful having them on. And there are links to all of that. People should definitely pick up this new edition of The Nation. It is a doorstopper and a lot of fun. Well, folks, it's time. Summer post games. Get to hang out with Matt and I on the other side. Usually these are just for patrons, but we've decided for the summer we will open it up to the public. We still do need all of your support to keep the program going. So you can do that by signing up at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Helps Matt and I out a lot, and also helps us produce not only this Tuesday show, but also our Sunday show bangers, which you don't want to miss. Matt, we got a few things we want to get to.
Yeah, let's just keep it on immigration for a little bit while we've sort of been on the topic. So let's talk about an Obama appointee, a guy named Tom Homan. He's the border czar, I guess is what we're calling him now. I don't think that's his official. I think he's with ICE, maybe DHS. Anyway, he was on Fox News, but before I put that up, there's just some interesting messaging coming out of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Twitter page. You aren't hearing the full story of the news on the news or social media. We arrested gang members and convicted felons, including child sex abusers and murders, in LA on the day of the riots. And the simple point is that the people aren't rioting because of those enforcement actions. In fact, no community wants that type of person as a member of their community. They won't riot to save them. In fact, that's why we have sanctuary city laws, so they are able to tell law enforcement, like, hey, this person is a child sex abuser. Don't deport me. I'm just trying to tell you about threats to people's public safety. So none of this is about that. But that's an important propaganda plank, because we do have, I would say, maybe a third of this country who are foaming at the mouth white supremacists, who want to see people deported, and who gives a fuck why? Because get them out of here, because I hate them. I'm nasty hearted. I'm broken. Maybe it's bigger, maybe it's smaller. I think that's here. I think that's pretty static in this country. There's a whole bunch of other people who were sold a massive lie about public safety and about their material conditions. And both those things were pointed at migrants as a way to enforce it. So that's why, that tweet coming from Tom from ICE there comes after this appearance, where Holman says what occasionally him and Stephen Miller will admit, which is that actually no, who cares if they have records?
Is everyone that has been arrested by ICE agents have a criminal record like those you've described?
Absolutely not. And I said from day one, January 20th, we will prioritize public safety threats and national security threats. However, we will enforce law. I may prioritize my family life over my work. Doesn't mean I ignore my work. We're going to force the immigration law. We've been honest about that from day one, especially in sanctuary cities. Well, we can't get the bad guy in the safety and security of a jail. They release him to the street. Well, we got to go to the street and find him. And when we find him, many times they're with others. Others that are in the United States illegally, may not be a criminal target, but guess what? If ICE is there arresting that bad guy and other aliens are there, we're going to arrest them. That's what sanctuary cities get. They put us in the neighborhood, they force us in the neighborhood. This is what happens. And
so now we are deploying the fucking Marines to sit on their ass in cities, however much that's going to cost, because people like him want to. What's the mission? Oh, it's like Call of Duty. Call of Duty East LA, Home Depot. We got to raid this Home Depot because 15 guys want to go tile somewhere. We need to, and the community might get upset if all of a sudden their fucking dad is disappeared into El Salvador. Yeah, man, that's not conducive for public safety. No one believes that shit about, there's some criminals. Oh, they were just with some other guys. The reason that they have to go into elementary schools, the reason why they need to go to Home Depot is because this has already been our emphasis in immigration enforcement. Criminals. Barack Obama when people say Barack Obama deported this many, Joe Biden deported more. That's because that's what they were doing. That's what they were doing. They're already doing it. Then it was a fascist lie that they were letting people just stay in as like rapists or whatever. So now they're embarrassed, and people like Chris Murphy be like, well, actually, Joe Biden did more deportations and he didn't have to do the National Guard.
So cool, yeah.
And so now, okay, they're going to get those numbers up for you guys, and it's going to be ugly how they do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what are you talking about, egging these kind of freaks on? I mean, they're antisocial monsters. And, I mean, I think the point that you're making, Matt, about like people rightfully being upset about this is a good one. Like, this is a fundamental part of like our democracy, right? Because, the folks who are watching these things with glee are people from all from like the rest of the country, right? It's nobody like in their actual community, right? Other than like the nastiest, most lonely, miserable souls you can imagine, who actually want to see, their neighbor get swept up, or the person who's working at the restaurant that they're eating at get pulled out, right? I mean, these are really viscerally disgusting, anti-social, anti-human things that we're watching. And there is like this perversion, I think, in American politics right now. Yes, the cruelness, the nastiness, but I think there is this kind of like separation, voyeuristic way of engaging with the world and with politics, where like, hey, it might not seem real to you. It might just seem like a kind of an epic thing, almost like a fun meme, right? To see, the people crying or being ripped away from their family, when it's kind of mediated to you through like a phone, right? It's abstract. It's like, it's an idea of being based or whatever, versus like an actual human being with a family and a life and a community and a heart and hope and all these other kinds of things. That like there is something about our politics right now that is just like so cruel, so nasty, all this other kind of stuff. But I actually think that there is like this kind of like almost like fantasy level of politics where people like aren't actually rooted in like their physical reality, their material reality. It's just, oh, this is some of the people I don't like being harmed on my phone, on the screen, and that's what I want from politics, right? And that really gives license to some of the nastiest monsters in this country to do horrendous things.
And it's weird. I don't know the names of some of these guys, but some of like the sort of pop streamers who like
horrendous, disgusting.
Who call for like Hassan to be arrested, and people are like pointing out that they supported BLM 5 years ago, and one of the guys couldn't even believe that he actually tweeted in support of BLM because it's crazy how much nothing matters to a lot of these people.
I mean, what I'm saying is like it's an outgrowth from like an internet addiction, like from an antisocial internet addiction, right? I mean, this is like one of those things. I mean, you know, if you're going crazy, like you have a difficult time like being able to discern reality from fantasy. And I think that a big part of Trumpian politics, a big part of that kind of swath of politics in this country is very much attached to that kind of disassociation with reality, because it's you know, like the moral monster you must be to desire these kind of things to happen. And I'll also just add to this. I know they weren't talking to us when they were saying this, but let's not let them get away with this. The fact of the matter is that the Trump administration, the Trump campaign lied about what these deportations were going to be. Now, yes, of course, everyone who's watching this is so smart and they knew ahead of time. But they told a lot of people that, hey, oh no, we're just going to go after this criminal army that the media has been kind of like creating this idea in the American public that there's like this mass movement of like this dangerous army of rapists and criminals who are breaking into the country to do harm to you, right? And it's a disgusting right-wing psychopathic lie for sure. But if you think, oh, that is bad, then maybe we should get rid of those folks. You know, a lot of people created like a distinction in their head. It's like, well, they're not talking about like the nice folks, or maybe the folks that I know, or at least the folks that I see and know are around me in my life. It's like this dangerous menace. And now they're very clearly, again, we all knew this was going to come, but don't let them get away with the fact that they lied. They lied publicly, regularly. And we're now seeing, you know, the dangerous consequences of what happens when a lot of people believe that lie. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and you know, there's one that I think liberals have been taking a little bit too much glee over with this woman who was stupid. Latinos for Trump, like dumb as shit. But now she's blasting Trump for the inhumane immigrant arrests, and you know, there's a certain extent where Trump, they say two things, right? Like Trump will say,
no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I'll just say, like, no, you are no better. Like, for people who do that kind of thing, they are no better than a fucking Republican who wants this kind of stuff. Because what does a Republican want? A Republican says, well, they broke the law. They didn't follow the rules of this country, so they should suffer, right? They should have something horrible happen to them. You're the same fucking person if you're saying that kind of shit. Oh, well, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. And what they were supposed to do was support Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party. And now they didn't. Oh, so now those people deserve whatever comes to them. Disgusting. I mean, it is the same mentality that you just want to, like, harm other people, do horrors upon other people for your own kind of psychic enjoyment. It is absolutely fundamentally perverted, anti-human, disgusting, and beneath any sensible moral person.
And not like Elon Musk, but this is the type of thing where this person has leverage. Like, I don't care what's in their heart and, you know, how maybe corrupt this person is. They should be encouraged to say, okay, I changed my politics. I'm not going to support this administration anymore. Mea culpa, and use it as a way to spike it. I mean,
wait, but the other party who's saying that Trump's like not being efficient enough at the deportations. Exactly. I mean, what the hell are you talking about? You know, this idea that like there is like, oh, these are the, you know, we talk about this with Stephen. We've been talking about this since the election. You know, the fact of the matter is that we have a monstrous party, which is the Republican Party. Absolutely. But we have another party that's fundamentally complicit in the same kind of thing. So sitting here and engaging in this kind of weight of who's worthy and unworthy is just a sick game. And look, if you want to do that, if that's what your life is about, then you should get out of like politics. You should not consider yourself to be a socialist, because socialists believe in an idea that we want folks' lives to get better, right? We're fighting for the common good, the cooperative commonwealth, like these higher ideals of humanity. And what you're saying is like you just want to swim around in the muck forever, and that you just hope that the right people are the ones who get harmed by this country, instead of saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't be harming people as a nation.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I don't. That's the only weird thing is like, what weren't you getting out of Biden with that? But that's politics for you.
Also, sorry, just really quick. This like tweeting thing that we're getting from like these government agencies, right? It's so whiny, like BS stuff. It's funny to come from the party that was freaking out about like the military is no longer tough anymore because they've put out like some nice recruitment videos. Remember that was like the big freak out from the Trump guys and all that for so long. And now we have like all of the official government accounts are just tweeting out like just whiny teenagers.
Do you remember Jade Helm? Like, can you imagine if Obama forced military troops, like Marines, into a state over Republican governors and municipal leaders' wishes?
That would probably be a good place to start an essay on how like America lost their collective minds. Was Jade Helm? I mean, that was really.
Look, like I'll defend some executive power grabs if it's to say like desegregate the South. And I don't pretend to have like a fealty towards our constitutional system entirely. I think, if you do like Lincoln break something like habeas corpus, you should have a good reason for it, and he did. That's the extent that I'm a constitutional liberal. Like, have a good reason. This is not a good reason. This is fucking ludicrous. This is all in service of. It's really demographics. Like there's not really any other sensical play here. It's that there are too many non-citizens, I guess, and it's not just brown ones that are getting deported, but it's a nationalist sort of frenzy we're in that isn't really. There's no
there's no end to it too, by the way, because it's not a solution to anything. Right.
Exactly.
It is just like it is a very violent and dangerous. I don't mean to to not talk about how serious and horrible it is, but it is a temper tantrum. It is a literal temper tantrum with high stakes and cost for people.
And it's not between you and medicine, and it's not between you and affordable housing, and it's not between you and nothing. It is a complete distraction. And I feel like it's one that our history kind of teaches us to understand, like in the wake of the Great Depression worldwide and that sort of stuff, and maybe projecting societal problems and political economic problems onto hate objects. Maybe we could have learned that lesson, but I guess we have to go through it again in this good old 20s.
Yeah, well, we got some other things to get to, Matt. Where should we go next?
Yeah, do you want to do some Zohran stuff? Let's
do some more Zohran stuff. Yeah, we got an update on this double crossing, right?
Oh yeah, and then we do want to do an update on Texas THC.
Yeah, we got some THC news for y'all.
Our boy Zohran Jujujistu has been getting a little heat. Got some ultras protesting him, but I think the more interesting stuff is the sort of way that the attacks, which I have been fearing, to call him anti-Semitic for, frankly, straightforward positions. The way that they came for Jeremy Corbyn, for instance, and Ilhan Omar and that sort of stuff. Like I was frankly like waiting for the shoe to drop, and it has kind of hit with a thud. Zohran's been really adept at answering the question, because the little secret is this isn't about, Karl Marx and Lenin and Stalin. It's about international law, and you can actually just refer to that.
And having seen the efficacy of nonviolent movements in creating compliance with international law, specifically with South Africa, that is what brought me to support BDS. And what I've said is that one need not visit Israel to stand up for Jewish New Yorkers. I believe that to stand up for Jewish New Yorkers means that you actually meet Jewish New Yorkers wherever they may be it at their synagogues and temples, or at their homes, or on the subway platform, at a park, wherever it may be. But I also do want to say that just by my having been a supporter of this nonviolent movement for compliance with international law, I'm not even sure if I would be allowed to enter into Israel, because I think that there is legislation that prohibits the entry of anyone who supports that legislation. So it is both a question for me, but also, were the answer to be different, I think the result would be the same.
Assemblymember, you've spoken specifically about previously supporting boycotts. will you continue to support the boycott of Israel if you are elected mayor? And you can also respond to what Mr. Tilson brought up. Yeah, you can go for it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'll answer Mr. Tilson's question after I answer yours. And Mr. Tilson, feel free to let me know if I don't answer it sufficiently. I'm someone that what I've said throughout the course of this campaign is that wherever Eric Adams' administration or another administration has taken us out of compliance with international law, I would bring New York City back into that compliance. My focus will always be on that affordability, but that is the consistency around that compliance. And I think ultimately the focus of our mayor should be on the issues of New York City at hand. Now, to the question around Benjamin Netanyahu, I was asked what I would do after he had just been issued an arrest warrant by the International Court of Justice. My answer is the same whether we are speaking about Vladimir Putin or Netanyahu. I think that this should be a city in compliance with international law. And we have seen other countries across the world who are signatories to the ICC state that they would honor that same request, be it Canada or other countries in Europe. And their honoring of it meant that Netanyahu did not travel there. And I think it is important to show leadership in a time when it is sorely missing. And there are some who may say that the United States is not a party to the International Criminal Court. Thank you, Whitney. I knew you were going there. And to that I say that there are times when courage is required. There was a time when it was not legal for same-sex couples to be married in this country. And still, then Mayor Gavin Newsom issued marriage certificates for those very couples in defiance of that legislation. What I am trying to showcase is a belief that international law is something that should be honored, should be respected, and something that we should actually bring our city into compliance with.
And just to be very, very clear, so yes, you will continue to support the boycott of Israel as...
I can't hear you.
I said, yeah, just to be very, very clear. So yes, you will continue to support the boycott of Israel if you are elected mayor.
What I would do is ensure that any of my actions moving... Sorry. Let me know when you... That any of my actions moving forward as the mayor of New York City would not be in violation of any of those international laws, and ensure that compliance is at the heart of it. That's all I would focus on.
I mean...
Yeah, I mean, you know, he speaks to it well. I mean, much better than, you know, all of the other freaks who are just, you know, tripping over themselves to say how much they will stand with the apartheid state. So
I live in the neighborhood that fucking Ben Gavir was invited to, what, like a month ago? And there were protests where two Jewish women, I believe one maybe Israeli, one of whom was interviewed by Breaking Points. One pretty political, anti-Zionist Jewish girl, and another not super political, just in the crossfire of these people who supported bringing that fascist war criminal who should have been locked up the second he stepped foot in this country. And said, no, he not only was in my neighborhood, he was touring around the Northeast. And where was he in Connecticut, but at a Yale society co-founded by Cory Booker. So, yeah, the idea that any of us is weird for wanting that to not be the case, or to say like, yeah, baby Netanyahu should not be welcome to come into this city. What are you talking about?
You know, flipping it around, I mean, it is absolutely wild that in the first place at the New York City mayoral debate, they're asked about whether or not the first trip they're going to do is to travel to a foreign nation. Anyone, by the way, it's kind of wild, but especially this one. And, you know, as you're saying, Matt, like the real question should be, should my city, should my community accept a war criminal? I think that that's a very fair question to ask, whether it's here in Austin or in New York. Should we welcome war criminals or people who are wanted for genocide? And I think the answer is kind of simple to that, by the way, no. So it's good on Zohran, you know, who continues to
rise above on this issue and on many, many others, where he isn't he doesn't portray himself as like a kind of ultra right. There are people who want him to say kind of maximalist slogans in response to all these kind of things. When the style that he has is one that is very direct, actually, about what it is that he believes. While also being very understanding that some other people might be coming from different places, so he explains himself, which is, I think, a very good skill for a politician to have, and especially for a left-wing politician to have, because so much of our movements is engaging both on like moral righteousness, fighting for a better world, all that other kind of stuff, but also bringing people along with us who might not have been with us beforehand, right? Showing people what it is that we think about the world, what we think about politics, why we think the way that we do. And, just on issue, from this to, systems of like building better municipal services in New York, he is just somebody who continually, I think, hits those notes really, really well.
Yeah, and there's this woman freaking out here, David Grossman, a good follow on the Twitter, points out this woman: a synagogue is given a platform to Zohran Mamdani isn't inclusivity, it's insanity. David Grossman points out that what this type of Zionism is, which is fascistic and murderous. He points out Savetsky has quoted Kahan in the past. This language, attacking the synagogue, is very much Kahan style. The JDL protested synagogues for inviting speakers to talk about race or reparations. Now, when you hear about pro-Palestine protesters, anytime they get near a synagogue, it's because they're selling stolen land in that synagogue under, again, against international law. That's very almost always, if not every single time, that's why a synagogue is being protested. But this woman can say, actually, you're being insane, and quote people like Kahan, who are responsible for fascistic violence in enforcing Zionism. Like, that's just not really worth a mention. Jake Tapper snoozing on that. I guarantee you won't see that on CNN. Or if you do, it's because he agrees that Mamdani shouldn't be given that kind of opportunity. And I'm trying to find some endorsements here. I think Mamdani is actually making a few, but I can't find this off the top of my head. But the polling shows that Jewish voters in New York are where you would expect them proportionally, given how he's doing. He's doing fine with them.
No, I mean, he's continuing to increase his support across the board, which is why we're seeing the knives out. I mean, you follow New York politics closer than I do, obviously, but we've already seen some folks who might have seemed to be in the camp or around the camp start to pull the knives out to stab Zohran in the back. I mean, again, I think that sometimes these coalitions can be kind of confused. I think that there's a lot of value in just sort of being full-throated in support of one person. I understand how I know there's a little bit of give and take here with this voting system there, but it's pretty amazing to see how uninterested I think some of the other folks in and around have been towards supporting each other.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it wasn't an endorsement of Mamdani that I'm thinking of, but Cuomo is losing certain endorsements from different groups in Israel. I believe Borough Park maybe, but I'll look more on that. They're instead leaving Cuomo off, which that'd be it for the primary. If Cuomo can't rely on that block,
I mean, there's two candidates for mayor. It's Zohran and Cuomo at this point. So the big question is who is getting left off of whose ballot. So that is material for sure.
Just one more, I guess, and we didn't really play the debate night where, again, you alluded to the question of hey, where are you going to go? And it was just kind of presented as a fun one. But when Zohran said, I was going to stay here and work for New Yorkers, I just need to follow up on that. What about Israel? Here's the day after, and you'll notice a lot of these are clipped by Jacob Kornblue, who I don't think is sympathetic to Mamdani. But the truth is he's not doing anything wrong, and so you can try to police him as close as possible. That is
one of the kind of the nice thing about Zionism for our job is that Zionists live in such a bizarre world where saying very acceptable normal things it sends them into a panic. And anyway,
you talk about insulated, man. I mean.
Because I feel like you did not want to make a definitive statement on this. Do you support Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state?
I support Israel's right to exist as a state with equal rights. I believe that every
Why
state...
not as a Jewish state?
Because I'm not comfortable supporting any state that has a hierarchy of citizenship on the basis of religion or anything else. I think that in the way that we have in this country, equality should be enshrined in every country in the world. That's my belief.
All right, let's talk.
Which, by the way, is like something that an American politician, it should be very easy to say, actually. That is like fundamental to our political culture and our political history.
100%. And that's why, like, you know, she was ready to get on him for that. But he's just saying what is, like, I don't want to downgrade his common sense. This is the law. This is like how, and like in a way that, like, not just like Law and Order, but this is like civilization almost.
Yeah.
And if you, and this whole thing of like, well, what about, like, why not as a Jewish state? Well, somebody who comment on that is a little boy who we're big fans of around here, John Kerry. This was when he was Secretary of State. And I've truncated this a little bit. He says if it is one state, and we all know it is, right? This is why the South Africa model is the same. We're not going to carve this up, continue carving this up. This is one state, and people under it should have equal rights. Here is John Kerry when said, like, what happens if it gets down to one state, and about Jewishness versus democracy, and if a contradiction, that contradiction be solved. Here's John Kerry.
Israel can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both.
Simple.
Israel.
And, you know, we're going to do a great essay from the New York Review of Books for a reading series coming up by a guy named Tony Jute. Or Jute.
Oh, yeah.
I always forget how to pronounce that one, but it's one that came out, you know, over 20 years ago, but it basically calls Israel an anachronism, like ethno-states are, which is something, you know, outside of the context of Israel, we all understand. And so this is important to just kind of keep hitting the fundamentals on this issue. And that's all you really need to do to win this. You don't need to do any trick shots. You don't need to go, you know, off the rafters through the backboards. You just need to say, hey, I think the guy who has an international arrest warrant out, we should honor that. We shouldn't, like, give him security so he can drive down Fifth Avenue to go to, you know, do whatever the fuck he wants and do some media appearances. Like, I'm not for that. That doesn't seem like Law and Order to me. And you know, so good on Zohran, and you know, that's why he's going to win.
Well, yeah, I really do hope that he does. And you know, some people have made a kind of point, strangely, in my opinion, to accuse Zohran of being a Zionist. You know, because he's, again, like, not taking, like, very, like, maximalist sloganeering whenever he gets a question like this. I think that I'm just trying to pull this up for us, but if I can, I'll just read it. Aaron Mate actually had a really good tweet on this very issue. Let me just pull this up. About the protest, and I'm sure plenty of people saw last week. Aaron Mate says, I think Mandami gave a pretty smart answer. I support Israel's right to exist with equal rights for all its citizens. This highlights the fact that Israel is a supremacist state and that its supporters, including his rivals, oppose equal rights for all. I think it's self-defeating to confront him over that. And I tend to agree there as well. You know, and I think, you know, this is, again, why Zohran is very much more effective, I think, than a lot of people out on like left-wing Twitter even. By framing it in that way, it does make questions like, wait, why is equal rights for all such a dangerous thing, right? What is it about this intention with it? Oh, maybe I might learn a little bit about the fact that, you know, certain people can't use certain roads, for example, based on their religion or ethnicity. That sounds kind of like something we know about called segregation, right? Like beyond even, I mean, it's just, it is truly a testament to, I think, Zohran's, you know, political capabilities that he's been able to sort of walk these lines. And I've been very impressed with his ability to not kind of mediate a message or, you know, water things down. But to not give in to some of the kind of, like, I don't know, ultra tendencies that you'll see expected of any kind of left-wing politician. And let's also just add one last thing. a big booster of DSA, which I've appreciated. I mean, a very different kind of politician. We've talked a lot. I mean, frankly, in the past 5 years, one of the big questions is like, how should these political movements be relating to elected officials? And one of the worries has been, that a lot of people have been sort of shot off into these kind of stratospheric, very influential positions, AOC being one of them, have very limited relationships with organizations like DSA. Specifically DSA, that's kind of what I care about, to be honest. Zohran is regularly talking about the Democratic Socialists of America, which I think is important for, one, having that relationship, but two, for that secondary fact that we were talking about, why his election is important even beyond New York, to kind of inspire and remobilize a different kind of politics in this country, to see people run campaigns like that across the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with and that point that Mate made. Like that, the problem is, do people not understand that what he says is impossible for Israel to live up to, like, or at least for Zionism to live up to?
Yeah.
Maybe Israel, but as the Zionist project is not one that is there to make equal rights for anybody within any kind of borders, wherever the fuck you want to place them. If you want to say one person, one vote, right of return, but we're still going to call it Israel, I'm sorry, we're cooking with gas when it comes to that, because just demographically, this is why Israelis need to remove people. It's important to point out that this is a numbers game to them. Mm-hmm. That's why the right of return, even though it's international law, since they were expelled in the Nakba, that Palestinians should have the right to return to the lands that they were expelled from. The reason they can't is because of the old demographics. Dave Rubin's talking about, like, well, if there's a genocide, however, there's so many of them. That's what they're worried about. And so that's what needs to go back. Fine. You want to recognize everyone's right to vote. We're not going to enshrine any one type of person over another type. And we're going to recognize international law.
Mm-hmm.
I mean...
Yeah, and, as we noted with Dave Rubin all the way back then, is like, the fact that Israelis... and their propagandists pay a lot of attention to, like, the birth rates of Palestinians, for example, betrays a kind of obsession that has a very nasty origin, for sure.
Yep.
Well, we still have a few more things we're going to get. So remember, everybody, we are doing these open summer post games for the summer to celebrate Left Reckoning. This is our 5th year of doing this. And to celebrate the community and continue to grow. We appreciate all of our patrons so much, who are the reason that we're able to do this. And we also encourage you to consider signing up at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We will still do, our Q&A, and I have those Discord questions loaded up. Discord is something just for patrons. And you go in there if you're a new patron and you want to ask us a question, live show Q&A, go into the live discussion room and @mod@ symbol MOD, the live discussion room, and I'll have those questions. We'll read a few of them up here in a second. But we do have a couple more quick updates that we wanted to get to, right, Matt? Do we want to do this THC thing real fast?
Let's do THC, and then we'll do our sombrero buddy, maybe, if we want to. And,
cool. So, folks, a lot of people will check out our video about Dan Patrick and his war on THC in Texas. That passed. It went through the House. It went through the Senate. Now it is sitting on Governor Greg Abbott's desk. And there's a lot of questions about whether or not he's going to sign it. He's been pretty tight-lipped about it so far, which I think does show that, like, he does think that there might be some maybe political benefit from, maybe potentially vetoing it. He can also not sign it, and it will become law. So he can either veto it or he can sign it. Or he cannot sign it and it will become law anyway. So basically, giving him a little bit of separation from it and its consequences. Dan Patrick has been getting a lot of flack about this. He has made it his personal crusade. We played those videos last week of him pulling everybody into this press conference where he freaked out about candy and THC cereal. He's been getting some kind of negative feedback from even organizations that generally are pretty favorable to folks like Dan Patrick. Fox Business
has a bill in Texas.
I'm just going to play a couple minutes of
ban
this,
all
for y'all to see just how they're covering this over at Fox Business.
Candies, gummies, potato chips, popcorn, all to hook an entire generation on drugs forever with high potency THC. That's why it's Senate Bill 3 and why I'm so passionate about it.
But if it does go through and THC is banned, it's going to be a huge hit to the Texas economy. An estimated $10 billion of revenue will be shut down. And not only that, but a number of jobs. More than 50,000 employees are in this industry with a payroll above $2 billion. So the economic hit will be significant. But let me bring in here Taylor Kirk. He's the founder and owner of 4K Pharma, the facility we're in here. And Taylor, you're in Imbo right now. You have a crop here, but where do you go from here if the ban is in place?
Well, essentially the state's trying to make us a felon for growing anything with THC at this point, if it goes into law. So I'm trying to figure out where we're going next. These products are not marketed towards children. Plain and simple. These are, adult use products that are full spectrum. They do contain THC, but they are full spectrum CBD, CBG products that are helping everyday Americans.
And so right now, you're stuck. You don't know what you're going to do.
We have no clue. We're waiting on the governor. He's the only one that can save the industry at this point.
And again, thank you, Taylor. And again, Stu, the governor
he does have national political aspirations for sure. And, he might be kind of thinking that, some other members of the Republican Party, even Republican primary voters might not look so kindly on something like this, where there has been change. I have a little bit of a video from an old school friend of the show, Matt, that we could play in just a second, but I want to hear your thoughts first.
I mean, I just think it's gotten so far out of control that those even, self-preservational political considerations, are they getting through? Like how this feels like a 2008 era type of campaign. It's 2025. People are used to weed, bro.
Well, I think that's true, but they also kind of shot themselves in the foot with this kind of half measure when it came to legalizing certain kinds of products. I mean, weed legalization is very popular in Texas. Here's what's really wild about Texas for people who don't know. I won't bore everybody with all the details, but across the state in the past few years, plenty of political organizations, particularly progressive organizations, have said, hey, state level, it seems like politics is kind of foreclosed to us, but on the city level, we can make changes. So all across the country, from San Marcos to Austin to Denton, cities were basically decriminalizing marijuana, right? They don't have the ability to legalize it, but they made it so that your police aren't writing citations or bothering people about it. And this happened all across the state. It was very popular because most people want to see the end to the prohibition on marijuana. Not only is Patrick doing this, but Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, has been suing and trying to overturn all of these decriminalization efforts. So what you've seen in Texas is, even though weed, I know you're saying 2008, how this is kind of a throwback, but even as it's also become more normalized and people have sort of gotten used to a new way of being, they're actually trying to draw people back. So, I think politically it really could shoot them in the foot. Now, the question is, are these people so insulated at this point from political will or political checks on their power, democratic checks on their power, that they just think they can do it anyway? I mean, they might think that, and there's a lot of signs that the Republican Party is sort of uninterested in the opinions of everyday Texans. I have this from Dana Loesch. You remember her, Matt? She was former NRA queen back in the day, also I believe at Breitbart. She has a radio show here in the Dallas area. And she was pretty upset about this. I just want to play this because, again, somebody who is a fervent, Republican, this is how she's reacting to it. It does show that there are cracks in the party on this issue.
That's crazy talk. That's the kind of talk. The reason why we're
Dan
here.
Patrick is a freak. Dan Patrick, you are a redacted moron. You are an absolute dick. Completely. That is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. Take that R after your name.
Okay.
Take it off. Welcome back to the program. I hate this issue because it makes me sound like Cheech and Chong. I don't consume it. I just hate authoritarians with the burning passion of 1,000 suns.
Okay. Can I
also,
say, Dana?
This is the same formula.
Try it. You look like you could use it, honestly.
Formulate garbage argument that gun control uses.
Yeah,
they just switch out guns and then they use THC. Welcome back to the program. Why am I mad? Because you have red state Republicans that are no different from Democrats. So that's the Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who's soft on guns too, for the most part. He's been on the show and we've talked. We've had some
That means the
discussions about
opposite of what she's suggesting,
It's
right?
because after yeah, well, for sure, but it's after that racist fanatic drove across the country from the Dallas area to El Paso to murder people. Dan Patrick said, maybe we should do something about guns. And he used the phrase, I will take an arrow to the knee over it. Now, of course, that's about as far as it went.
Said something.
You know, and session after session has passed and has now they've been doing the opposite, trying to make it easier for people to have weapons here. So him being soft on guns, I mean, it's just crazy. But anyway, we can give her one more second. And
this is dumb. It's like hearing Joe Biden talk about guns. So what Texas did, and I guess they're sending it to Greg Abbott's desk, and we're watching you, Greg Abbott, is they want to ban something that they legalized, and then they decided they don't want to keep it legal anymore. And it's the THC stuff. And this is where Kane's going to have to weigh in on some of it. We're not talking about smoking the joints. Okay? That's not what this is.
Okay. If you want to watch the rest of it, you can on your own time.
I will not be sharing the joints with that person. I just like the idea that, like, oh, you're acting like a Democrat.
Yeah,
Nixon
well,
did this, you moron. Like, what are you talking about?
Well, I mean,
You
that's
did it
what's
to
so
attack
funny.
the left.
And so later, I just don't have the patience for it. I'm sorry, dear listeners. But, you know, she does go on to basically say, like, if this is what the Republican Party is, then maybe I can't be a Republican anymore. It's like, okay, I have a feeling that you're not very serious about that. I can't imagine that you're going to be voting for anybody other than a Republican in the midterms or in the upcoming presidential election. So spare me all this kind of nonsense. And to sit here and be like, oh, the Republican Party, what are they doing? They've turned their back at the party. What are you talking about? This is what the party has always been, right? What are you talking about? This is the party of like legalization, right? Absolutely ahistorical. It's a party of big business, you know.
Quote, 1971, Richard Nixon, I am strong statement on marijuana. I mean one on marijuana that just tears the ass out of them.
He had to wait with words.
I think it was John Ehrlichman who said that, yeah, we were talking about that, and that was basically a way to criminalize black people and anti-war protesters. And that is as a license to cops getting in your life. Mm-hmm. That is something that, what's the Kennedy? It's not RFK, but the young Kennedy who's up in Massachusetts or Connecticut. When Boston, I think, or Massachusetts was looking at decriminalization, he literally explained, like, look, smelling marijuana gives cops a reason to do stops, and they can check people's cars. That is a huge, taking that away from cops is a huge difference maker. That a lot of these people, that's really, I mean, in part of, I think, what the drug war does internationally for America, but at least domestically, that whole thing of giving cops more license here, I think is the main reason it stuck around, despite everyone seeing the results were not, you know, to keep less people doing drugs. It was actually, you know, supportive of cartels, right?
And this is one last thing I just want to note before we go on. This is another quick Texas story. Kind of says, I think this story, I think, says something about the state of the Republican Party and the fact that they might be kind of nervous. They might be getting some kind of information, frankly, talking to folks, that the midterms do not look good for them. And this has been reported in a few places, but we have it here from the New York Times. White House pushes Texas to redistrict, hoping to blunt Democratic gains. A rare mid-decade redistricting push has unnerved some Texas Republicans who worry a drive to harm Democrats could end up endangering GOP incumbents in 2026. So what this story is about is that Donald Trump's team has been encouraging Republican leaders in Texas to see if they can fudge even more. We're going to look at a map of Texas's congressional districts in just a second, but they want to gerrymander the state even more, basically, than it already is. And we'll look at them again. They are extreme if you aren't familiar with the Texas map. The push from Washington has unnerved some Texas Republicans who worry that reworking the boundaries of Texas House seats to turn Democratic districts red by adding reliably Republican voters from neighboring Republican districts could backfire in an election that is already expected to favor Democrats.
Rather than flip the Democratic districts, new lines could endanger incumbent Republicans. Now, I just want to note a couple things. One, Donald Trump did exceptionally well across the country, obviously, and he did very well in Texas. In fact, in Texas, which was a state that people were, arguing and hoping was going to go blue, it has actually gotten redder over the past few years, including in large Hispanic districts in South Texas. So the fact that they're already saying, "Hey, we need to kind of like fudge the numbers a little bit more in Texas to help us out on the national level," shows that they're very, very worried about what's coming in these midterms. But what this also means, the reason why some of these Republicans are worried about this is that you do have those kind of extreme red Texas districts, right? Where Republicans just win by super majorities. They just kind of don't have to worry about losing their seat to a Democrat at least. Those people would likely see those elections become more competitive, which would, mean that some of them who are in kind of like safe seats could see themselves being put into political, into competitive seats, which is, worrying to them. Now, I'll pull up this map here. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, Matt, so people can see just how gerrymandered the state is already. And I don't really know if they have too many options here.
That's the thing that I've been wondering, because not specific to Texas, but other states, Republicans have gerrymandered them to all usefulness. Like, there's only so much you can gerrymander something until it becomes kind of self-defeating. I mean, Democrats actually, I've seen arguments made that they've done this in certain states to protect certain incumbents.
Oh, for sure. No, they do this everywhere.
Exactly, and not making that, and making less places a lot less competitive for them. But that creates a problem, because all of a sudden there's certain areas you just write off then. And if those have a lot of people in it, it's a problem. But yeah, look at this map.
Let's zoom in a little bit. Basically, as it's probably not surprising to anybody, it is the bluer districts are in Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, and Houston. But look at this. This is the Dallas district. There's not really too much more you can do there. You already have. Let's see if I can zoom in even more. God, of course I knew this was gonna happen. Sorry. But if you can't tell and you're listening, you have just absurd districts like this one, Texas 33, which basically envelops an entire area. Here in Austin, we have ridiculous districts as
that
well.
That one is
hilarious. This one, that's Greg Casar. That's Greg Casar's district, which, for people who don't know, this is covering over part of Austin, and then this little sliver to allow him to go all the way down to San Antonio, a whole other town. Right.
Was that like the right gutter on the interstate, basically? Like
no, it's I-35, which is funny because this district is 35. And then you have Joaquin Castro and Lloyd Doggett as well. Like what could you do? Like, you could maybe cut into Dockett's district a little bit, but I don't really see that there being a lot of opportunities for them to carve out more space. For them. So the fact that they're doing this is, one, I think is going to be very unpopular with congressional Republicans, right? But two, I think shows that they're desperate. They're extremely desperate because they realize that they're going to be losing more and more as the effects of their politics and policies, spark outrage and protests all across the country. So hopeful sign, I guess, at least, that it looks like the Republican Party and the Trump administration are panicking. They're joining the panicking party and are doing something that will probably bite them in the ass if they are successful with doing it.
Yeah, look, if war with China or something breaks out, this is moot. But we're gonna have elections again, folks. Again, barring world war, nuclear conflict, we'll be having elections.
And maybe we can make some of these districts, more competitive. Austin, has, very, very goofy ones. It'd be fun to have an opportunity to take on a Chip Roy, for example, if they fuck him on redistricting, because Donald Trump is worried that people don't like his kidnap grandma strategy of deportations.
Yeah, and D. Derb in the chat says, tell that to Elon's AI. I'm not sure if you're talking about, the thing I thought about is that they're just going to have AI do the gerrymandering.
Oh, I'm
And
sure, and it'll
sorry,
be even
it's-
more insane.
It's gonna get fucked up. Yeah, it's gonna be
They'll
absolutely
fuck it up. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Hey, look, I mean, anything could happen. Gerrymandering sucks, but they really just like, you can't make these. I'm sorry, I will say it. You can't make these districts more competitive. It really is like almost impossible.
Do you think the Republicans? Yeah, they just thought that. I guess let's only gerrymander them as much. Like they did as much as they could. They didn't leave it on the bone.
The only hope that the Republicans have here is that, the Democratic Party in Texas is like completely has been in shambles for my entire life. So there's always an opportunity for them to get more power. Don't misunderstand me, but I don't think they can gerrymander and kind of steal it in that way more than they already have.
Exactly. Well, should we leave off with this comrade here from these protests?
Oh yeah, and then we do have to take these patron questions though too, Matt.
Cool, we can do that. Let's do some of those, and then we'll watch this guy to play us out.
Sounds good. So these are only for patrons. Patreon.com/leftreckoning to support us. Again, thank you so much for joining us for the open post game. We're doing that this summer as a kind of celebration of 5 years of the program. We got these ones. So if you are a patron and you want to get access to this comes through the Discord. You go into the live discussion room and you @mod @MOD. First up, we have our good friend Carmen Josh, who says, "Does the real LA get overlooked in U.S. politics? Seems like in U.S. media, LA is synonymous with Hollywood, Malibu, and sometimes Orange County, but you never know. It's the largest manufacturing base in the country, and 40% of imports to the United States come through the LA ports."
I think it's definitely. It's hard to say. Like Mike Davis has written a lot on, but obviously he's not like, somebody CNN's talking about.
I mean, political media is kind of headquartered in D.C. and New York. That's why there's a kind of hyper focus on those places. Yep. I mean, I think it's a decent point that like there's a decent amount that gets missed. Also, though, when things happen there, they get covered in a way that like when things happen in North Carolina, they don't. Right. So, there's degrees of these things. Our good friend J.S., I'll say. Trump activating the Guard under Title 10 orders was a miscalculation because that immediately made every officer in the military go, that's illegal. As officers, we get hammered into our heads with the legal authorities and restrictions of different activation statuses are. So everyone knows that you can't use this Title 10 this way. That made people a lot more skeptical of the messaging from the administration than I'm used to seeing. No one is in favor of this action, and I've spoken with a few dozen officers from across the country. So for what it's worth, they don't seem to have buy-in from the military. Well, that's good, because that's different from some of the crazy shit that I saw. But it was on the computer, so.
But this is something that, like, Chip even spoke about. Like, it's true that they're more competent and ready than they were in the first term.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean something if everyone that you hire for personnel has complete shit for brains. And like you can be ready to act, but if you don't know the moves, you're gonna trip on your dick. And that's happened a few times with different ways. I mean, similar to the way Biden did the student loan forgiveness thing. There wasn't the most direct route to it, and sometimes that's catastrophic. So hopefully it is.
Comrade Abusses says, not a question, so skip if you want. No, we love this because it's a quick labor update. UFCW has been holding strike authorization votes across the West Coast. Seattle voted 97% to authorize. Tacoma voted 97% to authorize. Colorado voted 99% to authorize. SoCal authorized the results tomorrow, but it's looking good. Negotiation resumes this week, but corpos are staring down the barrel at over 100,000 angry West Coast grocery workers ready to strike, which is as close to an industry-specific general strike threat as you're going to get in the States. I'm so happy to see this level of solidarity with my fellow workers, and we're very happy to hear that update, friends. So we'll keep our eye on that and solidarity with everybody. That's huge.
Fascinating.
Our good friend Dave from Jamaica says, I've been watching protesters' perspectives, and cops are out of control. Frankly, conservatives are digging their own grave with this nonsense. Yeah, I hope so. I see both, unfortunately. I think that there is just like a lot of disgusting anger in this country, and a kind of desire to see your political enemies get beat up. But yeah, no, I feel it. I mean, this is the one thing when like the moms get kind of, agitated, and that's when you're in trouble, right? Like when people who don't really engage in politics that closely start being like, this is a fucking problem, you know. And then we also have something from our good friend Kowalski from Nebraska, who says, I'm conflicted on opening up the post game. I'm sorry. On one side, it's always nice to have a larger audience. It's nice to have a larger audience contributing to the conversation. On the other side, can we be sure that these people have the spirit of John Brown in their hearts? Are they prepared to get put on that Homeland Security list? Can they barbecue? These are important questions, Kowalski, but I'll say, like anybody who believes in the, in the good word knows, you got to spread the gospel. And if we keep it just for us, we won't be able to spread it out. And, just like a barbecue, it's always better with friends. So I appreciate the concern. I think these are the right questions, but I believe our new friends are here to stay, and they could become patrons at patreon.com/leftreckoning to really get that John Brown spirit going.
And, of course, when we talk about the John Brown spirit, we're him living upstate New York in a mixed race community, talking about God, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. And whatever this one was, that big mural of him. Rejects. Maybe the answer to the post-game question is subscriptions for less than the price of a rancid Charleston chew. Yeah. I know that is the entry place for R.M. Brown.
Oh, right. Michael
says, did you guys see Matt Huber's response to Sandeep's article on abundance? If so, interested in your thoughts. Yeah, so we are, I know Huber's working on a larger review of abundance and all of that in general. So we're actually going to have him on to make that case, probably, if not this month, next month. So we'll have plenty of time to have that conversation then. Kowalski says, Zohran's concept for municipal grocery stores I think is excellent and necessary. I was having the conversation with some friends who seem skeptical of socialist grocery stores. So I put it to them to make it sound like a normal thing to do, to say the following. Quote, in a capitalist society, any industry that reaches a stage of maturity, it can no longer generate profit because there is no more value to be made at that point. It becomes functionally a utility, which means it either needs to be regulated heavily by the state or its operation needs to be taken on directly by the state or as a nonprofit cooperative. Functionally, a grocery store should operate at cost since it serves a need. If you're generating a profit but adding nothing of value, you're functionally taxing consumers, which we do not consent to.
Yeah, I mean that's a great way to put it, and it is like you've reached this point of maturity, as you say. Your margins aren't great. It's tough to open up a new grocery store, and guess what? That's a problem because people aren't served by enough grocery stores, so you can't leave it to profit. Surprise, and a lot of people just can't compute that.
And I think that's a phenomenal point, and I mean that's basically the argument here, right? Last two, B-Dan says, is there a good book for the Democrats undermining Bernie in 2020? Well, I'd say, go ahead.
Grimm's books, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get
I'm not sure which one is more particular, but I would say in terms of the TikTok of what happened day by day, I think Grimm probably looks at it.
Exactly right. And our last one from Umberto Ionian, our good friend from Australia, says, Australia has put sanctions on National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Smotrich. We joined all of the Five Eyes beside the United States. Long overdue, but banning Knesset members from traveling to the West shows how bad Israel's government has fumbled the ball. Also, I'm glad to see author, musician, scholar, and ferocious lover David Griscom has returned to Left Reckoning. Open post games are a great idea. It can only be good for Patreon. That amount of public David averages out. Any personal observation on the murder of Red Corn? Jonathan Josh, thinking of you, brother. Stay safe, King. Praying for you, Matt. You did your best as host. Matt killed it. Matt was a real hero. I mean, when it comes to Josh, I mean, just love and solidarity to his family. It just is a tremendously tragic situation, for sure.
Yeah, agonizing, horrific.
Well, folks, with that, we're going to leave you with this beautiful message from one of the folks in Los Angeles. We'll be back this Sunday with our bonus episode. Bonus episodes are just for subscribers. You can get access to them at patreon.com/leftreckoning. they're not ones to be missed. I hope you all enjoyed the first summer week. I gotta come up with a catchier name than this, but
The summer, yeah, we'll think of something for next.
We'll think of something
summer
soon.
shindig, yeah.
Summer shindig. There you go. But all right, friends, we'll be back this Sunday. See you soon, and take care.
I agree with the term illegal. We're undocumented. We've been here for thousands of years before you guys showed up, screw up everything. We think we should organize together with the U.S. working class and fight together and create a better system. We're anti-capitalist. We think socialism does work, real socialism, not Venezuela, not Cuba, not any of that crap that they try to sell us as socialism. And we believe it would be a more humane system that will take care of most of all people's necessities.
Is there a country we can look to kind of model the socialism idea?
The only model would be Soviet Union the first 4 years. After that, it became a mess. Sadly, there was a bureaucrat leadership that grew out of that, but it has to do mainly with the attacks of the U.S. and all big powers against that system that was working. In the few years that it lasted, it showed the world that it could do much better than capitalism.